Hey, what's up, guys? Hope you guys are all doing well. It's time to review and analyze Attack of the Clones. I want to say that this film, it kind of takes a step back, or it kind of, I want to say, faces some challenges in areas where the Phantom Menace excelled. If you feel like filmmaking and visual presentation is more important, then you're probably gonna like Phantom Menace better. For me personally, the cinematography is just so out of place in regards to all the other films, even when comparing it to Revenge of the Sith. The color saturation is just way too much, man. Like, everything just looks super colorful, and I have to downgrade the color on my TV. I have to mess with the options on my TV in order for me to tolerate just looking at the thing. Now, Attack of the Clones is a film with a lot of things going on. It is a massive film. It has a lot of subplots going on. It has a lot of content, and it has a lot of good. However, it also has quite a bit of bad things as well. And for me, the primary things that I dislike about this film, there's two of them actually. One of them is just the overall photography of the film, which I'm not a fan of. And the other is the protagonists, namely being Padme and Anakin. Now, I just want to touch upon this whole issue with Padme and Anakin. Now, a lot of critics of this film, they say that the biggest issue with this film is the romance. However, I disagree in the sense that it's not just the romance that's wrong between Anakin and Padme. It's them being in the same room together, no matter what. No matter if romance is going on, no matter if political dialogue is going on, no matter if they're trying to do an action sequence together. I just do not find Anakin and Padme as compelling protagonists. They are not enjoyable to watch. There's just a lack of chemistry. Their scenes together feel lame. And there's critics that say that it's George Lucas's fault. It's not Hayden Christensen's or Natalie Portman's fault. It's George Lucas's fault because the dialogue is bad. If there was a better director, things would have worked. But I disagree with that. I really do. I just think that Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman are not good action heroes. Like, I cannot conceive another director stepping in and making me actually enjoy watching these two on the screen together in an action adventure film, yet alone a romance. I just do not buy it. And personally, I think that the weak link is not Hayden Christensen. Hayden Christensen gets the most of the criticism. For me, I think it's Natalie Portman, because I enjoyed Hayden Christensen in Revenge of the Sith. Him, when he's on the screen with Obi-Wan Kenobi, no problem. They're doing their bantering, they're back and forth, they're bickering. There's like a little bit of buddy cop kind of routine going on there, and I have no problem with it. I like the guy. But Natalie Portman as an action hero or as a political figure in this film just doesn't work for me. Now, I know what you're thinking. She did a very decent job in The Phantom Menace. And I agree with that. I enjoyed Padme in The Phantom Menace. I enjoyed her a lot. I thought she was outstanding. Natalie Portman did an outstanding job in The Phantom Menace, in my opinion. However, she feels like a totally different character in this film. And presumably it's because 10 years have passed and she is a different person, right? In The Phantom Menace, she was much more of a conservative, reserved, stoic kind of character, kind of humble. She wasn't really speaking up and speaking her mind as openly as she is in Attack of the Clones. And because of that, I don't like Natalie Portman in this film. And the weird thing, the weird thing, the thing that I just don't hear discussed enough and that I just find just totally bizarre is that they recasted Anakin for this film because it's 10 years later, but they did not recast Natalie Portman. So it's just so weird to see Natalie Portman in The Phantom Menace and then in this film, and 10 years have passed, but in reality, as far as the actual length that it took to make this film, it's only been 3 years. And I feel like they should have recasted the Padme character just like they recasted Anakin's character. That made sense. He's older now, get a totally new actor to portray him. I feel like they should have done the same thing with Padme. And when I say that Natalie Portman was not good in this film, I'm not knocking her as an actress. I think she's an outstanding actress. She was so good in Leon, the Professional. That's when I first saw her as the child assassin. I thought that was amazing. Natalie Portman did an outstanding job in Black Swan. She is a fully capable actress, no doubt. And again, my whole point is that Natalie Portman, for me, is the weak link in this lack of chemistry between Hayden Christensen and her. It's not Hayden for me. And really, that's the major issue with this film, is that we have three protagonists that we follow. We follow Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ewan McGregor tries his best to hold this film together. He literally puts this entire film on his shoulders, right? And for the most part, he kind of succeeds. He's the best out of the whole three main protagonists. And when Hayden is by himself, like when he goes to look for his mom, I'm on board. When he's paired up with Obi-Wan, I'm on board. But whenever he's with Natalie Portman, it's just, nah, I'm good. And it doesn't matter if it's romance or not. So it's not just the romantic scenes that's wrong with this film. It's the protagonists, Padme and Anakin together. No matter what they're doing, even if it's romance or not, it's just they are not interesting at all. They are not cool at all. Like when you watch Star Wars, you want to follow characters that you identify with, that you think are cool, and they just do not have that chemistry. And even though Ewan McGregor tries his best to carry this film, it's him versus the other two, right? Liam Neeson is sorely missed. A character like Liam Neeson literally carried The Phantom Menace because he is such a great actor, and Qui-Gon Jinn was such a great character, right? So even though The Phantom Menace had all these other issues, just because Liam Neeson was playing Qui-Gon Jinn, it was like I can tolerate all the negative things about The Phantom Menace because Liam Neeson anchored me in. He kept me attentive to the film, right? So that is the biggest issue with this film, right? Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen being in the same room together. Every scene with them. Now, I wouldn't say that every scene with them is like cringeworthy and oh my god, it's the worst thing ever. It's just not good. It's just, it's just like, can we get through this? That's just how I feel. I just want to get through their scenes whenever they're together and just get to the good stuff. That's how I feel. Now, talking about their relationship, their romance, for the most part. Now, I understand what George Lucas was trying to do with this romance. And on paper, it's very compelling. And I think a lot of people do not pick up on the intention of this romance. A lot of people feel like this romance was unnecessary. It was corny. It didn't need to be there. Why, oh, why was it included? Now, I understand what George Lucas was trying to do by including this romance. And you know what? It is actually compelling. What George Lucas was trying to do is he was trying to make their forbidden marriage, this union between Padme,
a senator and Anakin a Jedi, it represents the larger unsound relationship between the Jedi Order and the Republic. It's basically a metaphor. It's an analogy. This union between Anakin and Padme, it is symbolic of what is going on between the Jedi Order and the Republic, right? So it is so funny and contradictory that the Jedi, if they were to find out about Anakin and Padme being together, Anakin would get expelled from the Jedi Order, and maybe even Padme would get in trouble as well. However, the Jedi and the Republic are in bed together because the Jedi Order basically do whatever the Republic requests of them. They become basically lapdogs for the Republic, and ultimately this was their downfall, and that was the whole point of the Clone Wars, that they should not have been serving the Republic. They should have been serving the Force. And when you think about that, I actually kind of enjoy the idea of this forbidden romance. Like, a lot of people think that George Lucas was corny for trying to do this whole forbidden romance thing. But I think George Lucas had the intention of making this a metaphor for the greater issue, for the greater problem, that relationship that the Jedi has with the Republic. Now, the secret wedding between Anakin and Padme literally personifies the improper, unbalanced connection between the Jedi and the Republic. The two unions, these two marriages, they are literally gonna bring the downfall of the entire Republic. So not only is the union between Anakin and Padme going to bring down the Republic because of what happens with Anakin, being basically blinded by his obsession, and him not being able to live without Padme and doing whatever it takes, and ultimately turning to the dark side to save Padme, how that's going to bring him down and how that will contribute to the end of the Republic. But also the Jedi serving the Republic in the Clone Wars. That's also going to bring down the Republic. So those two unions are literally going to contribute to the end of the old Republic, right? Again, this is great stuff. This is a great idea. However, it is very unfortunate that there was no chemistry between the two actors, right? But I digress. Now, the second thing that I do not enjoy about this film, as I stated, is basically the cinematography. The look of the film, for the most part, turns me off. The only aspect of this film, as far as visuals, that I enjoyed were the scenes on Tatooine. Why? Because they were actually shot on location, right? I mean, sure, there were some scenes on Naboo that were shot on location as well. However, the whole thing is color time to the point of just oversaturation of colors, and things just look too unnatural for me, in my opinion. But I really enjoy the scenes on Tatooine. They were the best for me. I really wish the film had expanded more upon Anakin's search for his mother. But for the most part, I'm not a fan of the look of this film. I feel like the film is too colorful. The colors are oversaturated. And even though the 4K release kind of corrects this by giving it a more film look, and I was actually really impressed with the 4K release of this film, because it is a vast improvement to the Blu-ray and previous DVD releases. But still, at the end of the day, I'm not a fan of the visual aesthetic of this film. And also, some of the digital compositing looks really bad. And I think the digital compositing, because it was in its infancy, it looks a little off. One main example of a scene that just looks really bad is that sequence in which Yoda, Mace Windu, and Obi-Wan Kenobi are walking in the Jedi Temple, and you could totally see that background is fake. It just looks really bad, right? But you know what? Things like that shouldn't matter if the story was outstanding, and that's a totally different thing that we're going to get into. But just again, talking about just the look of the film, I'm not a fan of it at all. However, I still appreciate what George Lucas did as far as his contributions to filmmaking and pioneering digital filmmaking. I really appreciate it. And just to add, a lot of critics accuse this film of being a CGI fest. You hear that quite frequently, that this film utilized too much CGI and such. However, a lot of models were used in this film. And to my surprise, sometimes the rendering looked CGI-ish, but in fact, there was no CGI that was utilized. In fact, it was models, miniature models. And perfect example is when Obi-Wan Kenobi is in Kamino and he's being shown by the Kaminoans, the clones, and he's walking down that hallway. That's a miniature set. So what George Lucas was doing was he was having Ewan McGregor walk behind a blue screen, or walk in front of a blue screen rather, and then he'd have the hallway be a miniature, and he would composite Ewan McGregor with the miniature set, which was probably filmed with miniature cameras, and then he would put the Kaminoans, the aliens, the CGI characters in there. So you have a lot of different filmmaking techniques being implemented, and it is commendable. It's commendable because this is how movies are made today, right? But critics, they sit back and they just scoff at the whole film and say, oh, CGI, garbage, get it out of my face. And I really feel like that's unfair. However, there is a little digital look to it. But again, in my opinion, that has to do with the fact that this was digital filmmaking in its infancy, literally super early in its lifespan. And I think the things look like that because of that. Because if we compare Attack of the Clones with Revenge of the Sith just looks way better. And it's only a 3-year difference. So I just felt the necessity to state that a lot of models, miniature models, were utilized in this film. And I think that we should appreciate that, because people say that the prequels were just all CGI, and that is not true. That is not true at all. You'd be surprised at which scenes are basically made with miniatures and which ones are not, because you would look at a scene and totally think the whole thing's CGI, but it's not. Now, in regards to the opening crawl to this film, I thought it was a lot more captivating than the Phantom Menace opening crawl. It was more engaging, and it really grasped you, more so than the one in the Phantom Menace. It was less political, and it feels like a setup to the American Civil War, right? And I really like that we are introduced to the notion that a former Jedi is the leader of the Separatists. And just following up on that thought, I really wish that this film had focused more on Count Dooku, right? Count Dooku is a great character played by a great actor, Christopher Lee. I wish there was more Count Dooku in this film, right? Because there's so much more intrigue in his character. I want to know why he left the Jedi Order. Instead, we just get little hints and inferences, right? But if this film had focused on Count Dooku more, I think it would have been way better than the Phantom Menace, easily, right? And there was a lot of missed opportunity because this film did not, just dive a little bit more into the Count Dooku character. And it really is a little disappointing that we don't even get introduced to the character until an hour and 15 minutes into the film. But nevertheless, Count Dooku, Christopher Lee, when he's on screen, he steals the show. And it's not hard for an actor like Christopher Lee to do that. Now, in regards to the explosion, to the way that this film really grabs you, it hits the ground running, I really like that. That explosion, the assassination attempt on Padme's life, it grabs your attention right away. I remember seeing this film in the cinema, and I really didn't expect that. And I thought, like, okay, here we go. We're hitting the ground running. You got my attention, right? Now, I just want to make a little comment as far as the shot compositions in this film. The blocking has improved. The business that the actors are given has improved. But I'll get into that a little later. But as far as the compositing, there is a little bit of this stationary feel as to the camera setups, right? And I don't mind that. If you look at a film like Akira Kurosawa's Ran, that whole movie's like that, right? The shot compositions are a lot of wide shots. The camera feels very stationary, and that's because Akira Kurosawa was going for this whole kind of like he wanted you to feel like you were watching a play unfold. However, I don't know if it's as successful as a film as prestigious as Ran for this film. But I just want to comment that maybe the reason why there's this stationary feel to this movie is because of the use of the digital cameras, right? And at the time, the digital cameras were very big, right? And what that means is that there was a limit to the mobility of the camera. You cannot utilize camera movement as you could with a film camera. And there's actually a small documentary on the DVD release to this film. It's part of the webisode mini documentary series. I think it was like 10 web series documentaries that were released in regards to the making of this film, and one of them is about the digital filmmaking, right? And in that documentary, they actually speak to cinematographers, and they mention that we spent all these years, decades, trying to make the film camera more mobile, and we've been successful, but now we're back to not being able to move the camera as much with this limit mobility because of the digital cameras, because of how massive they are and because how many cables are plugged into them, right? So I just thought I'd add that as to why maybe there was this limitation as far as being able to move the camera as much as prior Star Wars films were able to. Now, there is a scene that takes place after this assassination attempt, and we have basically the Jedi meeting with Chancellor Palpatine. And the reason why I even bring this scene up is because we have to ask ourselves here, are the Jedi stupid, or are the Jedi so arrogant and blinded by their it's like the self-perception of their prestige that they don't even question whether Count Dooku is being malicious. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Padme comes through. She says, I think Count Dooku was behind the attack. And the Jedi don't even question it whatsoever. Instead, they say, Count Dooku used to be a Jedi. He would never do that. That's out of his character, right? And I have to ask myself, are these guys that dumb that they don't even consider the possibility, right? It's like basically saying a Jedi has never gone dark before, right? So basically what I'm asking is this intentional on George Lucas's part? Is he trying to portray the Jedi as so arrogant, or the Jedi of this time? Is he trying to portray them as being so arrogant that they overlook the fact that there's been Dark Jedi before, right? Because if we know the canon, we know that there's been Dark Jedi before. So why would Mace Windu say that he's a Jedi? He would never do anything like that. He would never assassinate anybody. It's like, is that intentional, or is this just bad writing on George Lucas's part, right? You know, I've gone back and forth with this for quite a while, right? And, you know, of course, I'd like to believe that this is done intentionally. It's done to illustrate that the Jedi have become so arrogant that they ignore the past, and that they just so arrogant that they don't even consider the possibility that one of their own formerly would even do something bad, do something malicious, right? So it's just something that I question myself time to time when I see this scene, right? Another thing that I have to ask myself as to what's going on here as far as the writing is, why would Padme even suggest that Dooku was part of this assassination attempt if he is the leader of the Separatists? Wouldn't the leader of the Separatists want no army to be created? Because, okay, let me give you some context. We have to remember, we have to keep in mind that Padme is the leader of the opposition to creating an army for the Republic. Remember, that's what the opening crawl was about. That the Republic is voting on a measure to create an army for the Republic. Padme is against creating an army for the Republic. So why would Dooku want to assassinate her, right? Okay, right? Now, ultimately, as a member of the audience, we find out why. Okay, we find out that basically Dooku made a promise to the Trade Federation to kill Padme as for because of revenge. They want revenge. The Trade Federation want revenge for what went down in the Phantom Menace, right? So that makes sense why they want to kill Padme, right? But what I'm asking is, why would Padme herself, why would the Padme character suggest this? Well, it's revealed later when she meets with the new Queen of Naboo that the Trade Federation are basically breaking away from the Republic and possibly joining the Separatists. So maybe she was able to put two and two together. Hey, the Trade Federation don't like me. And now they're considering the possibility of uniting with Count Dooku. And maybe Padme was able to put two and two together and see that maybe Count Dooku would initiate an assassination on behalf of the Trade Federation. But you know what? That's a huge leap of logic. And the film needed to emphasize more on why Padme would come to this conclusion. That's the whole point of my train of thought here, right? So, again, whenever I see this scene, man, I always have to just ponder this, man. And anyway, the novel does a much better job in conveying why Padme is able to reach this conclusion, right? And also, I just want to comment on how great the CGI Yoda looks in comparison to the puppet that was utilized in The Phantom Menace. This CGI Yoda looks outstanding, even today. For all the bitching and moaning about how the prequels look too CGI, when it comes to Yoda, in my opinion, Yoda looks great. Sure, he looks a little dated, but for the most part, he looks amazing. I think he looks just as good as Gollum from the Lord of the Rings films, or some of those digital characters in the Harry Potter films. I have no problem with the CGI Yoda. And that's not me knocking the puppet that was used in the original trilogy or anything like that, but it was nice to see Yoda be able to convey expressions that he was never able to convey because of the limitations of using a puppet. And I like seeing Yoda fight, right? And we'll get into that later because I know there's this big negative criticism crowd out there that don't like that, and I'll touch upon that. Now, I like Anakin and Obi-Wan together, right? When they're together, they're good. And it's like I said in the introduction, when Anakin is with Padme, I'm not really feeling the scenes. But when Anakin is with Obi-Wan, I like it. I think they got chemistry. There's this whole buddy cop feel to it. I enjoyed the banter. And this bantering, this bickering, this back and forth, the jokes and all that, like that's exemplified on the chase on Coruscant. That is what was missing from The Phantom Menace. Even though I prefer The Phantom Menace over this film, as far as this bickering, this banter, that was missing from The Phantom Menace. This makes Star Wars feel fun. And that's something that the original trilogy had in spades, that banter, that wit going back and forth between the characters. And I enjoy seeing Obi-Wan and Anakin do that together, right? And again, for people that think Hayden is a terrible actor, I recommend you check him out in the film Shattered Glass. He did an outstanding job, right? And if there's something that you don't like about Hayden's performance, just keep in mind that George Lucas is the one who decides whether a performance is good or not. And if you paid attention to my original trilogy cinemasthesis analysis, you'll know that George Lucas is a director who really prioritizes expediency over good cinema, quote unquote, right? Whether that's a bad thing or a good thing, I'll let you decide. But my point is, George Lucas is just going to try to shoot the scene, get what he wants to convey the story, move on. He's not going to be like Stanley Kubrick and get 30 takes for a scene to make sure that he gets this unique performance from the actor. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I'll let you decide. However, to George Lucas's credit, we have to remember he's also producing this film. It's his money that's funding this film. So he is approaching his directing more like a producer, right? He's looking at the bigger picture. Again, he's not trying to win any Academy Awards here, right? And this shift, as far as George Lucas commits, as far as his filmmaking approach, began with Return of the Jedi. Check out my original trilogy analysis, right? A lot of research went into that. And I'm not even saying that it's bad that George Lucas does this. I'm just saying he is so much greater now because he is not just a film director. He's also the CEO of a company. He's also the producer. He's also the director. He's also the writer. So, I mean, he's doing all these things at once, right? Anyway, the reason why I bring it up is because if you got a problem with something you see as far as the acting, just remember, hey, George Lucas is the one that said, that's good enough, let's move on. So basically, I feel like if there's a scene that just where the acting is a little shoddy, I think it's George Lucas could have done a couple more takes, is what I'm trying to say. Now, to his credit, I do want to say that George Lucas improved with his blocking in this film. Now, what is blocking? Blocking is basically the filmmaking term that refers to where actors stand on set and how they move around over the course of filmmaking. It's like choreography. Another thing that was improved was the business given to the actors. That means what the actors are actually doing in the scene. And that's one of the biggest issues that I had with The Phantom Menace. If you think about The Phantom Menace, there were major issues with blocking. A lot of the times the characters are standing around talking, they're not doing anything. Walking around talking, they're not doing anything. And it just feels boring, right? I felt like we need to give these Jedi characters something to do. We have to give them something to do.
A good example is when they're in Anakin and Padme are in her apartment and they're ready to pack, and she's packing up, getting ready to go back to Naboo so she can hide from the assassin. Look, she's packing her bags. She's going back and forth, you know what I mean, between the closet, packing her bags. And what's Anakin doing? Using the Force to play with that little ball. See, that's blocking. Giving your characters, you're giving your actors business to do when they deliver their dialogue. This makes it feel more realistic. No one just stands around and has conversation. People fidget, I pace, I may start cleaning up something while I'm talking to my friends. Give these characters something to do. It makes the scene all that much more interesting.
And there was another great scene that basically illustrates George Lucas, his improvement as far as the blocking and the business given to the actors and how the camera moves in relation to the characters and what they're doing. Perfect example, when Anakin is chasing the bounty hunter and they basically run into that bar, right? You see Anakin crash, they crash, he jumps out, he rolls off the ship, lands, he clutches his stomach, he's out of breath. And I appreciate that because it shows realism. If he had just acted like he just basically like jumped off this moving ship and landed on the ground like that and just got up like everything was okay, that would have been really fake. But anyway, he stops to catch his breath. It looks like his gut hurts. I appreciate that. Then he runs after the bounty hunter. We have multiple cuts going on. Conveying like a sense of anxiety and suspense and all that. And then we move into the bar, right? And then when we move into the bar, the editing and the way the characters are moving and the way the camera moves in relation to the actors, the way it's cut together, the way that it's executed, the way it's directed, George Lucas makes us think that the bounty hunter is about to sneak up behind Anakin and basically blast him in the back, when in actuality she was going after Obi-Wan, and he's able to basically cut her arm off in time, and it comes out of nowhere and it's a surprise, right? That was excellent. Right? There was nothing like that in The Phantom Menace. Nothing like that whatsoever, and I really appreciate the improvement in this regard as far as the directing goes. And another thing that I especially have to praise George Lucas for is no more Jar Jar Binks. Now, a lot of people complain that George Lucas doesn't listen to the fans. They criticize his artistic decisions. But you have to admit that he listened to the fans on this one. For him to basically just reduce Jar Jar to a length of 2 minutes for this entire film, he listened to the fans, and I'm glad he did because I'm not a fan of Jar Jar, right? Like, I don't absolutely hate him per se, but he was way too much in The Phantom Menace, right? If he had not been in The Phantom Menace, the film would have improved significantly, right? But point is, I really appreciate that George Lucas removed Jar Jar for the most part, and it shows that he listened to the fans. Now, I agree with Anakin, and when he basically contests Obi-Wan Kenobi, when he says that they're basically there to protect the senator and not investigate. And you see this little bickering moment between Anakin, and you know what? I agree. I agree with Anakin, right? Because why are they there? If they're Jedi and they're there just to protect her and not investigate, why not? Why are they not using their Jedi skills to investigate, right? So a lot of people think Anakin is whiny, he's a brat, but as far as the way this scene is, I agree with Anakin. And I think Obi-Wan Kenobi is just kind of being like, why are you being such a tight ass, for lack of a better term? And you know what? When you step back and you look at the prequel trilogy as a whole, and now that a lot of time has passed, decades, right? There is some great storytelling here, right? And a lot of original trilogy fans were upset, because we didn't get to see Anakin and Obi-Wan together as best buddies like Obi-Wan recollected in A New Hope. But come on, man. You had to know that there was something low down going on. Just because Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope recollected Anakin as a good friend, obviously there was some serious stuff, a fallout that occurred if he's going to be Darth Vader and you were his teacher, right? Obviously there were some things that Obi-Wan Kenobi was not recollecting to Luke, right, in the moment. So for original trilogy fans to kind of get upset that Anakin and Obi-Wan never got to be best buddies, and it was only basically in the first hour of Revenge of the Sith, like, look, the whole point of the Duel of Fates, of the Phantom Menace, was to illustrate that Qui-Gon Jinn was supposed to be Anakin's teacher, not Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi was not ready. The only reason why he took on Anakin was out of a promise to his dying master, right? And now we see the consequences of that action, because they're bickering, and even though they could be good friends and still bicker. I don't know why just because they bicker, people presume that they can't be friends, right? They could be friends and still fight and still have agreements. And again, this is more of a brother kind of vibe. Older brother with younger brother rather than master and teacher. And the reason why is because Obi-Wan wasn't meant to train Anakin. It was supposed to be Qui-Gon. That's why the whole fight between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul was called the Duel of Fates. There was two fates there. The fate that would have been if Qui-Gon had trained Anakin, and then the other one, which is that basically Obi-Wan trains Anakin. Oh, and there's also another one, which is none of them, because Darth Maul could have killed them both, right? But point is, it was never supposed to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. And yes, this is a total deconstruction of what was laid down in the original trilogy. And you know, I played with this idea of whether I liked it or not. But you know what? When you step back and you look at the total narrative, the whole 6 films, even though there's some stuff I don't like for that the prequels contributed, the prophecy I think is ridiculous, a little nonsensical, and the whole like Jedi taking little kids and all that stuff. But this I like, because it's a nuance. It's a very, very significant little detail that means so much. Obi-Wan was never meant to train Anakin. It was supposed to be Qui-Gon. And then this makes that fight in Phantom Menace, the Duel of Fates, all that much more epic and tragic and amazing. And then we see the fallout of this dying wish that Obi-Wan Kenobi honored when he made that promise to his dying master that he would train Anakin, even though he was like, I don't know about this kid, right? And then he took it upon himself to train him, and now we're starting to see the fallouts. Like, they're not really clicking as master and apprentice here. However, when we see them more as equals in Revenge of the Sith, it's like, okay, this is the vibe that we got from the original trilogy. But my whole point is, like, I appreciate this little bickering between them. And to me, I look at it as a nuance to their character. It's a character nuance. I don't look at it as like an original trilogy fan, like, oh my God, Lucas got it all wrong. They're supposed to be good friends. What is he, an idiot? Like, no, I no longer look at it like that. And it's a deconstruction. It's a deconstruction of what we initially thought. Right? And yeah, you know, George Lucas is writing the story backwards, but hey, you have a choice. You can either appreciate it or not, or hate it, you know, and I'm going to appreciate it, right? Especially after the Disney trilogy, right? So, again, there's a little bit of animosity here. They fight sometimes, but that is to be expected, because let's go back to A New Hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi can call Anakin his close friend, but look, ultimately he fell to the dark side and betrayed you. So obviously there was some animosity there, right? Now, one thing that I will say that I don't like about Anakin in this film is that he is way too obsessed with Padme from the very beginning. It's like it needed to be toned down significantly, immensely. Him saying, I thought about her every day for 10 years. It's like, come on, that's totally unrealistic and over the top with the writing right there. And not only is Anakin too obsessed, but he's also too pessimistic. Like, it's really a drag to see Anakin like this. Like, okay, maybe you love her, right? Maybe you think maybe it's lust, right? He just thinks she's so beautiful. He's just attracted to her. He can't help it, right? And he's a Jedi. He's never really around that many attractive women, whatever. This is the one. He just cannot help himself. He's attracted to her. But him being like kind of like pessimistic about it, like, oh, she didn't even think about me. She doesn't even care about me. It's like it's like really like it's just really, really, really off-putting, to say the least.
There's still some significant missed opportunities that could have made the film that much more powerful. And one of them being Anakin and the nightmares regarding his mother, and maybe the feelings behind not seeing his mother for 10 years. And Dooku. Count Dooku, his story should have been the central focus of this film. Instead, again, it's his story, his backstory is just little throwaway lines in the dialogue. So it's dialogue exposition about Count Dooku. But I would have loved to see Count Dooku give a presentation on television or something. Even though we know it's all a rouge, we know it's all bullshit because he's really a Sith, I would like to see what he's telling the galaxy. What is he telling the Republic? What is he telling the citizens of the Republic? Why did he leave the Jedi Order? What is his cover story for leaving the Jedi Order? And what is his real motivation for becoming a Sith? All this stuff would have been so interesting. Instead, we gotta read a book. We gotta read Darth Plagueis, whatever other book that they have, to explain that he had animosity over the death of his student, which was Qui-Gon Jinn, and other events that were occurring in the Republic. And he felt like the Republic was just useless and contributing to the imbalance of the galaxy, and he felt that he could be more effective if he left the Jedi Order and left the Republic. And even though the Jedi say it's a philosophical difference rather than, him having genuine animosity towards the Jedi, even though we know that's true, we're talking about his cover story there. Again, it just would have been so much more interesting for me as an audience member. But instead, we get little throwaway lines. I mean, sure, they're interesting. It's interesting when you see the opening crawl and they introduce Dooku as the leader of the Separatists, and then you find out that he was a former Jedi. You're like, oh, really? And you want to know more, but you don't get to know more. And there's even a deleted scene with the librarian and Obi-Wan, where Obi-Wan is staring at a statue of Count Dooku, and she briefly explains some of the animosities, or some of the sentiments rather, that led him to leave the Republic and the Jedi Order. Again, why did you cut out that scene? That's important stuff right there. I would have much rather had that scene than seeing some of those romantic sequences between Anakin and Padme.
Now, in regards to the deleted scenes that are included in the DVD release and in the 2011 Blu-ray release for Attack of the Clones, there are some great scenes that really should not have been left on the cutting room floor. And I'm going to talk about them throughout this review. But as I mentioned, there's a scene with Obi-Wan and the librarian that elaborates more on Count Dooku and his past. But there's also great scenes involving Padme. I know I gave Natalie Portman a hard time in the introduction to this review, but just hear me out. Now, if we were to swap out a significant portion of the sequences involving Padme and Anakin in the film with those that were in the deleted scenes, it would have improved the film immensely. Do they still have issues with chemistry? Of course. However, the deleted scenes with Anakin and Padme being together portrays them as normal people. They're having normal conversations rather than basically droning on about this romantic dialogue and this sappy romance. And basically, instead of Anakin basically spilling his guts out, we get to see them acting like friends. And for me, I feel like these deleted scenes were more romantic than the scenes that were actually included in the film. There's a great scene in which Anakin and Padme they go to her room when she goes to her parents' house, and they discuss some charity philanthropic work that Padme did on a planet somewhere, and how she befriended some children on this planet, and that basically their lives were being threatened because of displacement. So in other words, they were from a planet and they had to be relocated to another planet, but there were certain environmental factors that they could not adapt to, and as a result of this, the children died. Everybody died. And I thought this was a very interesting moment into Padme's past. And I thought it was intimate in a way that Padme shared something deeply personal with Anakin. That to me is more intimate than seeing Anakin and Padme alone by the fireplace and Anakin spilling his guts out to her, or Anakin and Padme having dinner and him basically floating some fruit onto her plate. You know, it's like this was more realistic. This was more relatable. This was actually seeing them get to know one another. Another great deleted scene is where Anakin is having a nightmare and Padme wakes him up from this nightmare. And he talks about how he's scared because he's losing his memory of his mother. He can't remember her face and it's bothering him and he doesn't want to lose that memory. And he talks about how long it's been since he's seen her, 10 years. And you know, this just helps me resonate more with Anakin on an emotional level, because if we step back and actually see what's going on with this guy, Anakin, right? He got rescued by Qui-Gon Jinn, right? Nobody else listened to Qui-Gon Jinn, even Obi-Wan Kenobi. Nobody wanted to train the kid. So the actual Jedi Master that was initially supposed to train Anakin died, and now he has to be trained by somebody that basically is doing it out of a dying commitment that he made to his master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? But it's there in Anakin's mind. He was rejected by the Jedi that he heard so many great things about. So Anakin left his mother behind to join the Jedi, and they didn't want him, right? And now 10 years have passed. His mom has been a slave. The Jedi never went back to help him rescue her. So it's very telling as far as the state of the Jedi, that they never went back and freed Anakin's mother. Now, I know they don't believe in attachment and all that, but it's just like, if the Jedi are about justice and peace and doing what's right, why did they leave Anakin's mother enslaved, right? And no, that book Tatooine Ghost doesn't count. I'm talking about what's in the movies. So for those that don't know, really quick, in the book Tatooine Ghost, Qui-Gon Jinn helps free Anakin's mom. Whatever, I'm not even going to get into it. If you're interested, read the book. But to me, I'm talking about the movies. That's what's important. The movies. So, coming back to Attack of the Clones, Anakin hasn't seen his mother for 10 years. And the Jedi are basically admonishing him all the time for having emotions, for having feelings. And it's just, I can totally understand Anakin's sentiments, right? And especially with Palpatine there, putting the seeds of envy and putting the basically inflating your ego and just taking advantage of the great misfortune that ultimately happens when Anakin loses his mother. But coming back to those deleted scenes, there's even more great deleted scenes in which Anakin and Padme actually get to know one another. Another example, it's an extension of what's already in the film, but when they first arrive on Naboo, the conversation there is way more expanded upon. And I remember Anakin just talking about how much he loved Naboo, right? And the exchange that they had felt so genuine. It felt like normal people. But they cut it out. And what's left in the film feels very robotic. It feels very mechanical, the way they're talking, right? Because you know why? They cut out the humanity of the whole performance between Anakin and Padme. They cut out the humanity of the romance. And instead they just left the surface level. Like, oh look, they like each other. And I don't know. I really wish that the deleted scenes had been put into the film. it would have improved it, right? It may have not been the greatest romance ever. I'm not saying that. And again, Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman, they still don't have good chemistry, but it would have been better than what's in there. And one more thing, to Natalie Portman's credit, there is a deleted scene in which she speaks to the Senate right after she gets assassinated. And I thought, it was a decent speech. It was about the state of affairs in the Republic, about possibly voting in a army for the Republic, and how she was against it, and how that they shouldn't give in to fear because it can only perpetuate hate and violence, etc., etc., right? But I guess George Lucas felt he had that sentiment covered with the opening crawl. However, I just don't get why George Lucas he insists on not making these films long. I mean, you see how it is today in MCU comic book movies, 3 hours long. Endgame, Infinity War, those films were almost 3 hours. The most recent Batman was 3 hours, but Star Wars can't be 3 hours. I mean, make it long. I don't care. I'm gonna watch it, right? In fact, when I watch these prequel movies, I watch them with the deleted scenes included, and they become longer, right? And I don't mind. Give me more story. But the whole point of all this is that you need to check out the deleted scenes to Attack of the Clones, because out of the entire batch of deleted scenes for the entire prequel trilogy, Attack of the Clones has the best deleted scenes, right? And then following Attack of the Clones is Revenge of the Sith. But Attack of the Clones has a lot of deleted scenes that I feel like should have been in the film. Just one more thing. There's a good, decent deleted scene in which Padme is confronted by Dooku. I liked it. I could see why it was cut out. But then again, hey man, give me as much Christopher Lee as possible, because you can never go wrong with Christopher Lee. And again, I wish there was more Count Dooku in this film. But moving along, now let's talk about how this film, in comparison to The Phantom Menace, improved as far as covering more story rather than plot. So for me, there's a difference between plot and story. Plot is basically how the story makes sense, how the characters get from point A to point B, things like that. And of course, plot is very important. The logistics of the plot, right? However, story is basically what the characters are going through. Now, in The Phantom Menace, there wasn't much story. We didn't really get to know how characters felt, right? And it was very plot driven. Here in this film, we get some story. We get to see a little bit of how Anakin feels. Now, there's definitely more room for improvement here as far as giving us more story, letting us know what these characters are going through. And Revenge of the Sith does that way better than this film. But I do give George Lucas credit, because each film in the prequel trilogy, as it progressed, got better in this regard. And I appreciate how we get to know Anakin, how he feels about his mother. And we barely get any alone time with any characters in The Phantom Menace, right? And I think that's really important. And at the very least, we finally got some alone time, or at least it was longer alone time than in The Phantom Menace, than any in The Phantom Menace. In fact, I want to say there was none. I can't think of any alone time where a character's by himself and he reflects on what's going on, or kind of goes off by himself. And I'm basically talking about Anakin, right? Anakin gets to go off by himself. Obi-Wan gets to go off by themselves. So we get a little bit of story, just a little bit. It's not enough. I'm not going to say it was enough, but because I definitely think the film needed more. But I am going to give the film credit for being an improvement over The Phantom Menace. Now, another thing that I want to talk about is the film noir influences in this film, in particular the sequences that take place on Coruscant. Of course, if we look at the Coruscant chase sequence that takes place at night, and we see the bounty hunters trying to get to Padme, we got the Venetian blinds and all this. This is all film noir stuff, right? And of course, the Coruscant sequences at nighttime totally remind me of the neo-noir science fiction film Blade Runner, right? And I appreciate that. And once again, that's George Lucas borrowing from bits of work, which is what Star Wars has always been. And I appreciate the effort. There's only one little criticism that I have in regards to this kind of film noir tribute thing, and that's that I wish there was more shadow. I wish the shadows were darker. I wish the blacks were blacker. Everything feels too lit, in my opinion. You can call this a nitpick, but hey, that's how I feel. I feel like there needs to be more contrast between the shadows and what's lit, right? And, you know, I do appreciate the whole mystery detective thing going on with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, this is tapping into the film noir inspiration that George Lucas has infused into this film. However, I will not sit here and say that upon repeated viewings, the Obi-Wan detective stuff retains its suspensefulness, right? Now, when I first saw it in the theater back in 2002, there was yes, of course, there was a sense of mystery in there, right? But when we actually sit back, there's not really much detective work that's really being done by Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And this leads me to my statement in regards to the Dexter-Jexter sequence, which I am not a fan of, right? I mean, I'm not, at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say it's the worst thing in the world. However, I feel like having this Dexter-Jexter character basically know who made the dart, it's just like, okay, out of all the people in the whole galaxy, Obi-Wan Kenobi just so happens to know a guy that knows exactly where this dart is from. And it just feels ham-fisted. And I feel like this scene in this little like malt shop that looks like Mel's Diner from or some kind of diner from American Graffiti. That's what it is. To me, it's self-indulgent. It's George Lucas basically paying tribute to his own film. However, it kind of takes me out of the film because it's too worldly as far as Earth. This is like a 1950s diner with rock and music playing, like American Graffiti, and I don't know, man. It just feels unnecessary and it's very self-indulgent. It didn't need to be in there. And most of all, it didn't need to be in there because I feel like it takes away from the Obi-Wan Kenobi detective work that he's trying to do. I would have much rather prefer that Obi-Wan just takes the dart, goes to the droids at the Jedi Temple. The droids tell him where the dart's from. He goes into the library, tries to find the planet Kamino. It's not there. He consults Yoda, and then off he goes, right? Or maybe he doesn't even consult Yoda. Maybe he just sees that it's not in the computers at the Jedi Temple, and then he goes to the coordinates, right? And the reason why I feel like these sequences could have been cut out is because it kind of messes with the pacing of the film. And not only that, but going back to the deleted scenes, I would have much rather had some of these deleted scenes in there. Really. Now, I'm jumping all over the place, but let's go back to this chase sequence on Coruscant, which I really enjoyed. I actually enjoyed seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi jump out that window. It was unexpected. Yes, it was a role reversal, but that's what made it exciting and unexpected. I like the chase, and one thing that I love about this chase was that there's no pointless, ridiculous exposition of aliens like there was in the pod sequence, right? The pod sequence was thrilling. I loved it, but I wish there wasn't this unnecessary exposition. I wish there wasn't we focus on the race. It wouldn't cut to scenes of aliens selling the Star Wars version of Cracker Jacks in the stand and seeing the aliens racers acting all goofy and stuff. We only get one little tiny scene like that in this chase, and I'm grateful for it because it makes me focus on the chase. It helps retain the suspense, right? and the excitement of this chase in Coruscant. And another thing that I loved about this chase is that I love the banter. I love Anakin and Obi-Wan going back and forth like a buddy cop comedy. It was great. I didn't think it was cringeworthy or anything at all. I thought it was excellent. Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor, they got good chemistry, right? And I love seeing Anakin hang off the assassin ship. I love seeing him jump off the ship that he was with Obi-Wan, and then he lands on the assassin ship, and you see the wind speed trying to throw him off the ship. That was awesome stuff, man. Great action sequences. George Lucas does excellent action. Really, he does. Now, I want to talk about a deleted scene again. I'm going to keep talking about how great these deleted scenes are that weren't included in this film. And this deleted scene is involving Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu. And it's relating to this scene, the scene in the film where basically Anakin and Obi-Wan are given their assignments after they get the dart. So again, I'm jumping around, but going back to the scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan, they meet with the Jedi Council, and Anakin is given his mission to protect Padme, and Obi-Wan takes it upon himself to investigate this bounty hunter, this assassin, right? So immediately when I saw this scene, I initially felt like, again, are the Jedi just stupid, or are they truly just blinded by their arrogance when it comes to assigning this assignment to Anakin? So basically, they're going to assign Anakin to protect this girl who he is madly in love with, right? I mean, the lust that he has for Padme is coming out of his ears, right? But then the Jedi are going to be like, okay, we're going to send them on this mission together by themselves. And I mean, it just felt like total buffoonery, right? But the sequence would have been fine if there was this deleted scene that was cut from the film included, because it makes the Jedi not look dumb. And basically, in this scene, Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi are having a conversation. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, like a reasonable person, tells Mace Windu, hey, I do not think that Anakin is ready to take this mission. And then Mace is like, why? And he says, because he has an attachment to Padme. He has this emotional connection to her, right? And it's like, oh, well, why wasn't this in the film? This should have been in the movie. Instead, this has been swapped out for a similar scene in which Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and Mace are in the Jedi Temple, and it's very similar, but they leave out the most important part, which was Obi-Wan Kenobi conveying to the Jedi Masters that, hey, Anakin has an attachment to Padme. He has this emotional thing going on for her. I don't think he's ready. And in the deleted scene, Mace Windu says, you got to have faith in your student. You have to have faith that he'll do the right thing. And I'm like, oh, what? There we go. The Jedi aren't stupid. Instead, it's like, okay, we have Obi-Wan Kenobi sharing his genuine concerns because he is not blind. He can see that Padme and Anakin, that there's something there. He could see that his student has a lust for her, right? But then Mace Windu shows the reasoning, the rationale for the decision. Hey, you got to have faith that your student will do the right thing, right? And I like the way Samuel Jackson delivered that line. It was very genuine. I mean, sometimes, for the most part, he comes across a little mechanical in this film, but in that specific deleted scene, I like the way he delivered that line. It felt very sincere and very believable. And again, this scene was important because it makes the Jedi not look stupid, right? And for me, it shows what's going on, what the characters are feeling, right? Which is important. This is the story, as I said. And for some reason, the scene that is in there, the very similar scene that's in there, it's stripped of any humanity. It's like Instead of Obi-Wan Kenobi talking about Anakin's emotional attachment to Padme, he just goes, I don't think he's ready. And that's it. And it's like, so that could be a million reasons why Obi-Wan Kenobi thinks that Anakin isn't ready. But we as the audience, we're seeing like, look, he's not ready because he has this huge lust for Padme. It's going to jeopardize his Jedi training, whatever. Right? So, again, this deleted scene needed to be in the film. It's a shame. It's a shame that it was cut out, right? Because by not having it in the film, it just makes the Jedi look really dumb. They're gonna pair Anakin up with Padme, send them to this romantic planet by themselves, and it just makes them look totally blind to the fact that there's something going on with Anakin when it comes to Padme, even though it's as clear as day, right? And it also makes George Lucas look bad as far as his artistic decision making, because it makes it look like he just sent them to Naboo because it was a romantic environment. He put them there to fall in love, right? But if you had that deleted scene in there, I feel like it would have changed the nature of the whole setup as to Anakin protecting Padme. However, I still feel like rather than having Anakin and Padme go somewhere and fall in love, it would have been better to have placed them in a dangerous situation, right? And in this dangerous situation, maybe they develop an emotional connection and then they fall in love, right? Maybe as Anakin and Padme take the refugee ship to Naboo, they're attacked by bounty hunters, and maybe they're attacked by Django or another bounty hunter, and their ship crashes, and in the crash Anakin has to take care of Padme or vice versa, or something, some kind of dangerous situation makes them develop a strong emotional connection, and love can develop out of that, right? And before, I'm jumping around, but before Anakin goes on the refugee ship with Padme, before he goes to Naboo, there's a scene in which Palpatine and Anakin meet together. It's the only scene that the two have together in the entire film. However, it's a very important scene. I really like this scene because here we see Palpatine planting the seeds of emotional poison in Anakin. He's inflating his ego, right? He's telling him that he's the greatest. He's telling him that he's better than Yoda. He's telling him that he will be the best, right? He's telling him he will be the most powerful, right? And he's inferring that the Jedi are holding him back. And when that terrible situation with his mother comes to fruition, then we see these seeds of emotional poison begin to grow. And then this is when Anakin, starts to have his meltdown, right? And we start to see traces of the dark side. And I love this scene. Palpatine, he's not in this film as much as he's in Revenge of the Sith and Phantom Menace. However, Ian McDiarmid always does an outstanding job. And Palpatine, Sidious, will always be one of the greatest movie villains of all time, right? Now, I just want to address how some critics of this film feel that Anakin is too whiny and all that. Outside of him spilling his guts to Padme, I don't have any problem with Anakin being whiny, because you have to remember, Luke Skywalker was whiny too. I mean, give me a break. Do you remember how he was acting before he found out that Yoda was the Jedi Master? He was acting pretty whiny. And to me, that's only him acting whiny, Anakin. It's just mirroring how his son is going to be, right? And you know what? Like it or not, but when you're that age, late teens, early 20s, I don't care who you are not as grown up as you think you are, right? When I was 20, I thought I was an adult. Hey, because I'm 18 now, I'm an adult. Now that I'm older, man, I was stupid, right? So I have no problem with Anakin being whiny outside of the romantic stuff, which we all know is an issue, right? Now, coming back to Anakin and Padme being on the refugee ship, even though, again, these sequences with Hayden and Natalie Portman together, they're not the best. However, as far as what George Lucas is trying to convey in the scene with Anakin basically misconceiving the whole compassion being love thing, I really like that. So Anakin says, since the Jedi are encouraged to be compassionate, he views it as the Jedi being encouraged to love. And in his mind, he's using that kind of to rationalize his feelings for Padme, right? And I can totally subscribe to that, right? I could totally empathize with those sentiments. As somebody that doesn't like to be attached, I like to be independent. However, being compassionate, sometimes you feel the necessity to go beyond simply being compassionate to another person that you like and wanting to be, get closer, be romantic, take it to a higher level, be intimate. So I can totally understand Anakin subscribing to those notions and those sentiments. And I really feel like it would be immensely hard to not want to crave intimacy in this. If I was in the predicament as Anakin, right? If I had to swear off any attachment, relationships, right? And even though I already knew the ultimate relationship, which was the love between a son and a mother, right? See, the other Jedi didn't have that, right? But Anakin did. So he knows about this deep emotional connection, right? And this is why the Jedi didn't want to train Anakin to begin with. But since he was so powerful, they decided to make him the exception to the rule. And, I totally empathize with Anakin, right? So I never thought this scene was corny, even though, again, Natalie Portman and Anakin together, it's just not cool. But I can see what George Lucas was trying to do, and that's my point here, right? I like seeing this struggle with attachment that Anakin has, right? And it also brings to mind the basic, you could look at it almost like a philosophical discussion, right? True love versus possessiveness, right? Is true love really compassion in the sense that we allow people we love them unconditionally, right? We love them unconditionally. Or is there a certain sense of possessiveness or condition, right? I mean, sure, the romantics, the poets say love is unconditional, but try applying that in real life, right? Really, it's not easy, right? Especially if you want to have a relationship, right? I mean, I'm old enough and I'm jaded enough now to honestly say that love has conditions, right? It does. I don't care, right? But then there's that whole philosophical debate, right? Because that's what I say as somebody from the world, right? Who's navigated in the world. But the gurus, the spiritual leaders, they say love is unconditional, right? So again, this kind of stuff resonates with me. And it reminds me of some things that are in those Carlos Castaneda books, which were an inspiration to George Lucas. And, I really appreciate these themes that are in this film, right? It's layered. Even though this film comes on the surface level, it comes across as some childish sci-fi movie. It's layered. It's layered with some potent themes, right? And another thing that comes to mind when I see Anakin with this sentiment, this misconception, right? It really, really conveys to me that Qui-Gon Jinn should have been Anakin's teacher, right? And it's a shame. And it also shows that the Jedi have become too orthodox. They've become way too orthodox. They're anti-human. They don't believe in emotion. And I could see why George Lucas made it this way, because he's trying to tell a story. He's trying to convey a message, even though I feel like he went a little overboard, especially with the Jedi taking little kids from their parents thing, which I hate. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I basically hammered it in pretty good in the Phantom Menace review. One thing to take note of is that the Jedi, they weren't like this prior to the prequel era. They weren't like this in Tales of the Jedi. The Jedi were allowed to love. They were allowed to marry, right? They were allowed to have emotions so long as they can control them and not allow themselves to go over to the dark side. But something happened with the prequel era, right? And the Jedi became way too orthodoxy, right? And they became too arrogant, and this became their downfall ultimately. And they began serving the Republic rather than serving the Force. So, moving on, there is a sequence that I really have issues with, and this is when Obi-Wan Kenobi goes to see Yoda. It's the scene where Yoda's teaching the Jedi children, and he goes to see Yoda, and he's basically trying to find the coordinates of Kamino, right? And it's not the... I mean, I really don't like the way this scene is directed. I think the kids could have been directed better if you pay attention. Half those kids don't even say their lines, but whatever. The bigger issue here is basically Yoda. Yoda does not have the common sense to even consider that Count Dooku may be the one that erased Kamino from the Jedi archives, right? That to me is ridiculous.
Obi-Wan says that only a Jedi could erase something out of the archives. And here we are, Padme is accusing the assassin of being Dooku, who is a former Jedi. So Padme accuses Dooku, a former Jedi, of assassinating her. Oh, a clue into who the assassin is erased, and only a Jedi could do that. Huh, I wonder who it could be. Durr! Maybe it's Count Dooku. I mean, at the very least, I understand that the Jedi and that Yoda want to think the best of his student. They want to think the best of Dooku. They don't want to make an assumption. However, just the fact that they don't even consider it, it's like, come on, man. It makes the Jedi look stupid. It makes them look stupid. And I understand that the arrogance of the Jedi was their downfall. I mean, but were they that arrogant? Were they that arrogant that Obi-Wan could say, only a Jedi could erase the archives? And then you have Padme here like, I think Dooku tried to assassinate me, and he's a former Jedi, and not be able to put two and two together and even consider it? I mean, come on, I don't know if it's lazy writing or George Lucas really wanted to make the Jedi look like some arrogant fools. But either way, it's very frustrating to me. I would have appreciated Yoda at least go, Dooku was a former Jedi, and Padme thinks that he was the one that assassinated her. I may have to look into that. That's all you needed. It would have made the scene a little bit more believable. I'd rather just have the whole scene cut out entirely to the point where the librarian in the Jedi archives was like, oh, that place doesn't exist, and Obi-Wan's, but it's supposed to be there. And he just took off and said, I'm going to go check myself. That would have been fine.
Okay, now let's talk about something that I really enjoy about this film. Something that I really love. Now, I really love all the scenes that involve Kamino. I think that the Kamino scenes are outstanding. They really are a throwback to 1950s science fiction films like War of the Worlds. You got the classic template for the Kaminoans, that being the Greys, the aliens that are the Greys, big eyes, pale skin, kind of elongated skulls and things. And I really enjoy all the scenes here, and I really like this sterile environment, right? And there's a lot of symbolism going on the planet of Kamino. Firstly, you have this water planet, and water symbolizes life, because you can't have life without having water. And when we come to these sequences in Kamino, it really brings out a greater context a greater context that is basically present in this film, right? And another theme. And that is, it's this Attack of the Clones movie is a story about unnatural procreation, right? The sterilization, right? And it really reminds me of that novel, that book, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, right? And the reason why I feel like there's this theme of unnatural procreation present in this film, Attack of the Clones, especially in the Camino scenes, is because we have the clones, right? And obviously the clones, they don't have a mother, right? And if you really think about it, there is another theme here, and that is procreation without the mother, this unnatural procreation without the presence of a mother. You have the clones. You have the Jedi, right, who take younglings from their families because the Jedi can't procreate. So how are they supposed to continue their order? They have to take children from other families, right? So again, we have this unnatural procreation. We see it in the Jedi younglings, we see it in the clones, and we also see it in the droids, in the droid factory, right? This sense, this theme of this creation. It's just like creation, but in an unnatural manner, right? And then falling back to the theme of procreation without mothers, I mean, the only individual in the entire movie that has a mother is Anakin, right? The Jedi don't have families. The younglings don't have families. They were taken from their families. That's the way the Jedi are able to continue their order, right? By taking younglings away from their families. The clones don't have a mother, right? The droids don't have parents, right? The only person in this film that has a parent, that has a mother, is Anakin. And what happens to her? She dies, right? And I think that's a very powerful theme right there. And it's not discussed enough when people talk about this film. People like to complain about this film, and it's really easy to point out the flaws and cut it down and just kind of dismiss it as a silly sci-fi blockbuster with no kind of deeper meaning, but it's there, right? And I really think that George Lucas is trying to convey something prolific right here. He's trying to convey a message about unnatural procreation and the importance of mothers and what are the consequences if we deviate from that, right? If we deviate from the natural order of things, from family, and especially the nuclear family. And again, falling back to what I said about the Brave New World, that book really paints a nightmaric picture of a future where there's no more nuclear families, there's no more mothers, there's no more fathers, there's no more marriage. And you see this right here in the Star Wars galaxy. I mean, sure, if we really get technical and we look at the Star Wars galaxy, of course there's families in there, right? On all these other planets, blah, blah, blah. We know that. But I'm talking about the characters in this story, right? And the greater implications of soldiers without families, right? The clones, they don't have families other than each other, you could say. Then you have the droids. They don't have a creator outside of a factory, right? And then the Jedi. So it almost like makes me ask, like, it not necessarily ask myself, but I see that even as crazy as it sounds, but there's similarities between what the Jedi have become and what the clones are and what the droids are. It's like they've become this uniform, emotionless, familyless, like almost like they're like robots themselves because they do what the Republic asks of them. They do not serve the Force, even though they think they do. But ultimately, this is what leads to their downfall, right? And I think George Lucas had this all he had this all engineered in his head, right? He had it all planned out. It was very subtle, but it's there. And I really appreciate it, right? I think there's some really deep themes in this film that often get dismissed really, too easily, right? And I just want to say Django versus Obi-Wan Kenobi is amazing. That was one scene in this entire film that made me feel like I was watching original trilogy kind of stuff, right? It really hit the head on the nail, right? As far as capturing that tone and that spirit. I love the rain coming down, the blue night sky with the lightning striking. Things felt gritty. And you know what? I have no problem with Jango Fett being the template for the clones. To me, this redeems Boba Fett's character. Like, don't get me wrong, I like Boba Fett. Boba Fett looks cool. He came across as a badass in Empire Strikes Back, but come on, man. You and I both know he went out like a sucker in Return of the Jedi. He went out like a fool. He really did, right? But George Lucas, he redeemed the character. And I like how he was able to look at this character, Boba Fett, and be like, look, man, the fans really like this character. I kind of don't like the way he went out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring him back using being artistic and bring him back in a creative way and have him be the template for the clones. That way he's still kind of Boba Fett, but at the same time he's a different character, right? And I like that, right? Because I know that there's critics out there that don't like that George Lucas did that it somehow is a disservice to the character, that it somehow shrinks the universe, makes the Star Wars galaxy feel smaller. And I understand that outlook. However, I like Boba Fett too much to feel that way. Like, I always wanted more Boba Fett, and I wanted him to come back in a badass way, right? And I appreciate what George Lucas did. I have no problem with Jango Fett being the clone template. In fact, if you read or look into the making of Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas always played around with the idea of Boba Fett having some kind of connection to the clones. It was there. It wasn't set in stone in The Empire Strikes Back, but if you look at the notes, if you look at the making of Empire Strikes Back book, you can see notes and treatments where Boba Fett it was deliberated that Boba Fett possibly be a clone or somehow tied to the Clone Wars. Same thing with Lando, right? Lando, at one point, it was contemplated that Lando may be a clone or something like that. So, you know what? I'm open to the idea and I appreciate it, right? And let's talk about this mystery of Cypher Dyas, right? So this is where things get interesting. This is where this whole Obi-Wan Kenobi being a detective, film noir kind of vibe starts to get some kind of merit. And I like how George Lucas is kind of blending the film noir 1950s science fiction vibe together, right? In regards to the mystery of Cypher Dyas, some people were left feeling confused or that there was a plot hole in this movie because I guess it wasn't fully elaborated, the connection between Cypher Dyas, Dooku, and Tyrannus. And even when the trilogy was over, I remember hearing critics being like, oh, George Lucas never explained the whole Cypher Dyas plot line. What an idiot kind of sentiment. And I totally disagree with that because there's such a thing as inference, right? inference. And basically, we are told that Sifo-Dyas placed the order. Sifo-Dyas was killed, right? Then we find out that Tyrannus hired Jango Fett. Then at the end of the film, it's revealed that Dooku is Tyrannus when he meets Sidious. So from that, we can infer that Count Dooku killed Sifo-Dyas, right? And that he basically set up this whole clone thing with Jango Fett. I mean, I don't understand what's so hard to understand, right? I even when I was really young and I saw the film, I kind of knew that. Like, did I really need it to be fully explained to me like it was in the Clone Wars TV show? I think that was season 6. They finally basically came out and yelled at the audience at the screen like, Count Dooku killed Sifo-Dyas and placed the order of the clones in his name. Duh! And really though, I was like, was that really necessary? I mean, I guess for people that just don't have the capacity for deduction, they can't deduce that Dooku killed Sifo-Dyas and set up this whole clone thing with Jango Fett and the Kaminoans just by that simple exchange between Sidious and him at the end. I mean, I was able to interpret that immediately. So, no, I don't have a problem with that. No, it's not a plot hole. You have to use inference, right? But I guess some people don't have the capacity for deduction. But again, my whole point is I never had a problem with this whole mystery of Sifo-Dyas. I never felt like it was a plot hole. George Lucas didn't explain. Oh my God. I just never understood that, right? It's clarified at the end of the film. It's not a plot hole, right? Now, one thing that I do wish was improved upon as far as this segment of the film was that I really wish that the Jedi asked more questions. Now, I understand that Obi-Wan Kenobi has to play along. He has to pretend that he knows what's going on with the Kaminoans. He can't be like, what are you talking about? Because he's gathering information. I totally understand that. However, Mace Windu and Yoda, when Obi-Wan tells Mace Windu and Obi-Wan what he's discovered, I just feel like their reactions are they're lifeless, man. It's like they don't ask questions. Like how is this possible? Who is paying for this? We need to follow up on this. We need to investigate. It's like their reaction is just so it's so wooden and just so it lacks any kind of sense of inquiry from them. Almost like they don't care. This is not of import, right? It's not important to them. And I don't think that's what George Lucas was trying to convey. However, that's the sense that I feel when I see that scene, right? And I really wish that somewhere in this film, maybe not specifically in that scene, but I wish that somewhere later in the film, the Jedi ask those questions. They investigate. Who's paying for this? How is this possible? How can a clone army be created for 10 years without some kind of finances being expedited to the Kaminoans? And maybe we need to investigate and try to find some paper trail, but there's none of that, right? Of course, if you go and you read the expanded universe, blah, 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 and Darth Plagueis, we find out that he was the one financing everything. But, it just, all we need is a couple of sentences, a couple of lines of dialogue in the movie to give the world building more validity, right? That's all I ask for. Because without it, it just makes the Jedi feel like they either don't care or they're stupid, right? And, I really want to talk about one more thing here. I want to talk about the scene in which Padme belittles Anakin. So we're going back and forth. So while Obi-Wan Kenobi's investigating the Kaminoans, we're cutting back and forth between Obi-Wan and Anakin and Padme. Now, I don't know why this scene with Anakin and Padme was in the movie. It was very awkward. And I'm not talking about awkward romance. I'm talking about literally an awkward exchange, like awkward as far as confrontational. And it's the scene where Padme belittles Anakin in front of the new queen, right? So Anakin basically is like, hey, I'm the one in charge of security. He wants to basically give his input in regards to Padme's security. But she's like, oh, Anakin is just a Padawan. He's not really a real Jedi, right? That's the kind of like the sentiments that she's kind of expressing to the new Queen of Naboo. And Anakin is like, hey, wait a minute. I'm in charge of security, right? And then they have this weird exchange, kind of like, very standoffish, almost like there's a fight brewing, an argument, right? And you know what? I 1000% agree with Anakin. Right? I empathize with Anakin. I don't know why Padme was belittling him like that, right? I mean, that was kind of messed up, right? They're supposed to be childhood friends, and she totally put him down. It was very passive aggressive. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but that's the way it came across. But my point is this. What was the point of this scene? I don't understand the point. It's like we're trying to set these two up. Never mind that whenever these two are on screen together, it's lame. But just for the sake of argument, for George Lucas, that he's trying to establish a romantic connection between the two, right? But it's like, okay, everything's all good. They're having these moments, these tender moments, and then all of a sudden it's like standoffish. And then it's just like, I don't understand what he's going for. I really don't. I do not understand what he's going for. It just comes across as a disjointed mess, this romance, right? And I really to this day do not understand why this scene was included, other than the fact that it kind of establishes that the Trade Federation and the Commerce Guilds are working with the Separatists. Like, I guess that was the only important information in this entire scene, right? Now, going back to the courtship between Anakin and Padme and them having a picnic by the waterfall, that is easily the worst scene in Star Wars film history for me, as far as aesthetic. In my opinion, it's not the worst scene as far as how it destroys canon or how it's offensive to me as somebody that enjoys Star Wars lore. Not by a long shot. That's the sequel trilogy easily. This is just offensive to me as far as aesthetic. It's just so cliche and corny. This whole sequence comes across like a made-for-TV Disney Channel movie, right? And then you have Padme frolicking through the grass, and then Anakin's riding that CGI horse, and then he acts like he got hurt, and then they roll around in the grass, and then John Williams' music is playing, and it's just it just comes across really corny, really cheesy, really cliche, and it really throws the tone of the movie off, just like Jar Jar Binks did, right? What this is, similar to the Dexter Jettster stuff, but it's worse, this is the prime example of being too indulgent. This is overindulgent as far as George Lucas, right? Because there's too much of a contrast between this and the ruggedness of the original trilogy, or even the ruggedness of the Phantom Menace. It's just or the ruggedness of the rest of the movie within itself. It's just way too out there as far as throwing the tone of the film off, right? And it's too indulgent, right? It's like George Lucas, he lacked that restraint to be like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to do it, and then I want to create this iconic 1940s romantic scene, and he's like, well, he needed to stop and be like, look, wait a minute. If I do this, this scene is going to stick out like a sore thumb and totally throw the tone of the film off, and it's going to feel like a parody. But George Lucas didn't do that. Instead, he went with it, right? And again, this scene is just dreadful. It's dreadful, right? However, I really have to ask myself as far as what was George Lucas going for with all this romantic stuff? I mean, I've been complaining that the aesthetic is way too pretty looking. It comes across too perfect looking. Everything is looking like an immaculate oil painting and all this stuff. And things just look too romanticized. Maybe, and I consider this, maybe George Lucas was trying to purposely create this sense of paradise, right? Because by the end of this film, all chaos erupts, right? All hell breaks loose, right? It's the beginning of the Clone War, right? And this film really ends on a somber tone, right? It's kind of dark, right? However, the beginning of this film is not like that for the most part, minus the whole chase through Coruscant assassination attempt stuff. But with all this stuff on Naboo, I really ask myself, is this kind of like George Lucas trying to set up this sentiment like paradise lost, right? Like paradise is being lost, right? Because Naboo is like a paradise. And then you have this romance, which is basically, it's a metaphor for the forbidden nature between the forbidden union, rather, between the Jedi and the Republic. Now you have Anakin, a Jedi, and Padme, a Republic senator, right? And everything is fine on the surface. Everything's beautiful. Everything's romantic. It's paradise. But beneath the surface, chaos is ready to basically erupt, right? I could see what George Lucas was possibly trying to do. However, the execution is another story. And that is basically a sentiment that I have for a lot when I watch this film in particular. And again, going back to this dinner scene, it's very colorful, too colorful. Things look really artificial. And you know what? When it comes to that scene, the infamous scene where Anakin talks about I don't like sand, and how everybody always makes fun of this scene because of Anakin saying that he doesn't like sand. And I, for the life of me, cannot understand why. Especially when Natalie Portman has a line of dialogue that's a million times worse. And no one ever talks about it, right? Like, I totally understand Anakin saying that he doesn't like sand, right? He comes from a planet that was a sand planet. He was a slave. It was a terrible life. I mean, can you imagine just sand everywhere? I mean, why would you even like it, right? And he's only saying that because of what Padme said. Padme said something so stupid prior to what Anakin said. She said, "Oh, we used to swim to that island every day, lay on the beach, and try to guess the name of the bird singing." Like, she literally says that. And that line right there is just preposterous to me. Like, we used to lay on the sand and try to guess the name of the bird singing. That's the line that I just can't fathom. Like, as far as any human being uttering that line in real life. Just being like, we tried to guess the names of the birds singing. Now that is an awful line of dialogue right there. Like, that, George Lucas really topped himself for that one right there. Like, that to me is easily the worst line of dialogue in any Star Wars movie ever. We tried to guess the names of the birds singing. And then Anakin's like, well, I don't like sand. Why does he say that? He says that because she talked about lying on the beach. So it's like, what's the deal? Like, why is everybody making fun of that line, but not the line that she said, which was truly awful, right? I just don't understand it, man, right? But anyway, Anakin, with all these scenes between Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen, I mean, again, Anakin is just too obsessive. Talking about that he thinks about her every day for 10 years and that he loves her. Look, it's not love, it's lust. And I can understand if he thinks it's love, but it's lust, right? And it's just too much. It really needed to be toned down. And you know, I want to like this. I want to like Anakin. You know, I like Anakin for the most part when he's not with Padme. But Anakin just comes across way too obsessive. And I just for the life of me, it's hard for me to stomach, right? Because this is supposed to be Darth Vader, right? And I have to see him like this. And sometimes I don't want to see him like this. Sometimes I don't want to see him like this. I really don't, right? But to George Lucas's credit, there is some subtle foreshadowing as far as him becoming Darth Vader, which I can appreciate. Such as when he says, "I can't breathe," when he talks about his feelings to Padme. Like, yes, that's total foreshadowing of him being Darth Vader. And I can appreciate the subtle nuances of that, right? I really do. And I will say this, to George Lucas's credit and to Anakin's credit, that at least after he spills his guts to Padme, he moves forward. That's it, right? He doesn't talk about it ever again. You know, he tells her how he feels. He expresses his feelings to her. She shuts him down, and he's like, okay, all right, boom. Next scene, I'm going to go save my mom, right? And then she's the one that comes back and is like, I love you, and then we all know the rest, right? So, to George Lucas's credit, at least he took the rejection like a man, right? So I can appreciate that, because we could have gone a totally different way with Anakin getting really whiny and obsessive and acting like a crybaby, and thank God that's not what happened, right? Really. Now, I really love the standoff between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jango Fett. So this is before they got into the actual physical fight, which I thought was great. You know, we got to see Boba Fett use his flamethrower, his jetpack, all these gadgets that we only dreamed of seeing Boba Fett use, right? We got to see Jango Fett use them, and it was like, again, total redemption of Boba Fett. I loved it. I loved every second of it. But when Obi-Wan Kenobi goes to meet Jango Fett in his apartment, that the acting there is outstanding. These two come together face to face, and they have this conversation. But beneath the surface, there's an entirely different conversation taking place than what is actually being said, right? So Obi-Wan Kenobi's like, have you ever been to Coruscant? And then Jango Fett is like, maybe. That right there is like Obi-Wan Kenobi basically saying like, hey, are you the assassin? And then Jango Fett's like, yeah, I am. What are you going to do about it? Right? That's what's really being said. And then you see the look in their eyes and the microaggressions and all that stuff. And it really is conveyed to me like, oh man, something's about to go off. Like, these two basically just gave each other the middle finger. All the while, on the surface, they were cordial, they were diplomatic, and I feel like I could really feel the tension right there in that scene. And the acting was outstanding. The actor that plays Jango Fett, outstanding, right? I love this guy's face, right? This guy looks like a seasoned warrior, right? He is amazing. Now, in regards to the child actor that plays Boba Fett, I'm indifferent to him. I don't really have anything particularly bad to say about him, and I don't necessarily think his performance was outstanding. Again, I'm kind of indifferent to little Boba Fett's performance, right? However, similarly to how the standoff between Jango Fett and Obi-Wan was great, So was the standoff between Dooku and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The acting here is outstanding between Ewan McGregor and Christopher Lee. I really enjoyed the lore that was discussed here, because here it is illustrated or conveyed to the audience that Count Dooku was Qui-Gon Jinn's master. So here we have this kind of standoff between the student and the master's master, which I thought was very interesting. And then when we have the lightsaber duel, you have Obi-Wan Kenobi's apprentice fighting Obi-Wan's master's master, and then in comes Yoda, and then Count Dooku fights his own master. So it's awesome to see this master and apprentices standoff and duel. It really gets deep into the lore, and you kind of wonder, again, I wish I saw more of why Dooku left the Jedi Order, but you speculate, and it's kind of inferred that because of Qui-Gon Jinn's death, that was an influencing factor. Yeah, I really appreciate this scene. Again, the acting between Christopher Lee and Ewan McGregor is outstanding. And I think Count Dooku is a great character. I really wish there was more of him in this film, because Christopher Lee just brings a presence to this character, to all his characters, that was missing in Darth Maul. Don't get me wrong, I love Darth Maul. Darth Maul's a badass. But here you actually have a character that has dialogue, right? And that's really important. And later on, when the lightsaber duel takes place, I love that Count Dooku is taunting Anakin. He's taunting Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's even taunting Yoda. As much as I love the Duel of Fates, there was no taunting in that. And, it worked for that fight, because Darth Maul, being this mystery, being this unknown, lethal, evil force, contributed to the mystique of the character, right? But here, they know Count Dooku, right? They know him. So there's going to be some dialogue. There's going to be some taunting. Point being, love Count Dooku, love Christopher Lee. He's an outstanding actor, right? And once Anakin and Padme leave Naboo, the film turns into a pretty decent movie, right? Once we get to Tatooine, the film is good for the most part, plus or minus a couple of scenes that I have issues with. But for the most part, the whole issue with Padme and Anakin, the whole cringeworthy stuff, it's left behind. And we get some alone time with Anakin as he goes to search for his mother, which is my favorite part of the movie, right? Because he's not with Padme. And then we don't have to worry about the terrible chemistry between Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman. And the film just feels more serious, right? Once we get to Tatooine. And in regards to the sequences on Tatooine, it's the only portion of the entire film where I actually like the cinematography. The cinematography looks great on Tatooine. Why? Because they're actually outside. They're actually using real sunlight. And it looks great. The film looks beautiful. It's clear. It feels like a real photorealistic environment. And again, it feels more accessible to me visually, aesthetically, because it's being shot on location, and I really appreciate that. Now, the one thing that does look fake is when Anakin hops on that speeder bike, and it's obviously blue screen, right? And you can tell that the environments are fake, right? So there's a perfect comparison right there. All the other shots on Tatooine, like when Anakin and Padme go to Lars homestead, look real. Now compare it to that shot of him on the speeder bike. It looks kind of fake, man. Nevertheless, I like that scene. It's intense. It's great to hear John Williams' score, The Duel of Fates, which is one of his best contributions to music. And even though aesthetically the film leaves, it just makes me wish that they shot on location more. For me, if I don't like the film as far as how it looks and on an aesthetic level, I'm still not gonna knock the film, right? What's the most important thing, in other words, is the story, right? That's why I still appreciate these scenes of Anakin looking for his mother on Tatooine, because this is an intense part of the story. And if you pay attention, when Anakin says goodbye to Padme before he goes to look for his mother, the shadow, the silhouette that's cast upon the, I guess you want to say, the large homestead, the building, whatever, it looks like Darth Vader, right? And I love the foreshadowing there. And I don't think that was intentional. I think that was a coincidence, but it works in the film. And sometimes that happens during filmmaking. Sometimes coincidences happen and they contribute to the story. And I thought this was great because his shadow totally looks like Darth Vader. And then we kick in John Williams' Duel of Fate score, and it just works. The whole sequence works. And I just want to say, the actor that plays Clegg Lars is great. He's a great actor. I totally find it 100% believable that this guy has been living in the desert as a farmer. He feels war-torn from fighting the sand people. I like his whole swag. I really do. Now, at the 1 hour and 15 minute mark, and I forgot to mention this when I talked about Count Dooku, that's when we're introduced to Count Dooku, right? So I kind of jumped ahead with Dooku and his whole little standoff between Obi-Wan when Obi-Wan Kenobi got captured for spying. So we're not introduced to Count Dooku until 1 hour and 15 minutes into the film, which kind of leaves me wanting more, man. It's kind of a downer, and I just have to say that Dooku should have been introduced in the film sooner. And I love seeing this whole meeting with him and the Techno-Union Army and the Trade Federation. And here it's revealed why Count Dooku is behind the whole assassination attempt on Padme. Because he basically owes, or it's an obligation that he's trying to fulfill on behalf of the Trade Federation. So once he assassinates Padme, then the Trade Federation is going to fully join the Separatists. So boom, there we have it, right? Still doesn't explain why Padme kind of was able to guess that Dooku was behind it, unless you want to count that whole exchange when she met the new Queen of Naboo, where she was speculating that the Trade Federation may want to join the Separatists. I don't know, man. I feel like things should have been fleshed out a lot better. However, this meeting between Dooku and the other Separatists was great. I love how the Techno-Union Army leader has to mess with those knobs in order to speak, and it's like messing with radio frequencies. I mean, it's so weird, and it's so George Lucas. That is 100% George Lucas, right? I remember seeing that in the theater, and just people were laughing, not laughing at it, but just laughing at the enjoyment, because it's such a creative type of alien, right? And it's something that I totally can see in George Lucas's work. That's his signature, to come up with weird stuff like that. I mean, things like that are in his first movie, THX. And I just love stuff like that, man. It really makes me miss George Lucas, because you don't see this kind of thinking out the box creativity in the Disney stuff, right? And now, the sequence when Anakin finally loses his mother was great. Right, it was very, very heavy stuff going on there. The performance by Anakin's mother, the actress, was outstanding. I always liked Shmi Skywalker, and I thought she was one of the best things in The Phantom Menace. And just seeing that Anakin was too late to save his mother, so he finally takes it upon himself to go rescue his mother, to see his mother after all these years. And as soon as he reaches her, she dies. I mean, that's such a bummer. On top of all the other stuff this guy's been going through, being rejected by the Jedi Order, when he thought they were so great. Losing the initial teacher that he had, Qui-Gon Jinn. Having to work with Obi-Wan Kenobi, who wasn't ready to train him. And all this other stuff. Now losing his mother. And then you got then you got Palpatine there planting the seeds of I guess you want to say of envy and inflating his ego and all this stuff. And you could totally see how Anakin can be Vader, right? The execution could have been better, but I see what George Lucas was trying to do, and I appreciate it, right? And then Anakin slaughters the Sand People, which is absolutely foreshadowing what is about to happen with him ultimately turning to the dark side. And if you want to get technical, this is him turning to the dark side, right? It's just not him swearing his allegiance to the Sith, but here, this is him giving into the dark side. And I don't think he's ever done something like this at this type of magnitude as far as doing something this dark. I mean, he's slaughtering the Sand People. Sure, it's revenge. It's understandable. But the fact that he's going after, I guess you want to say, the young ones, the mothers, and all that stuff is questionable. Because you would think he would just go after the warriors, right? And I don't even know why the Sand People just wanted to torture his mother just for fun, right? I mean, I've read comics and we see in the Boba Fett television series, not that I care about it, but I'm just saying, we see the Sand People, we see a little bit of their culture, and I just don't understand why they tortured Shmi. I mean, is that all they did? And maybe they did other stuff too. I mean, I don't know. I just don't understand why they did that. Like, what was the purpose as far as how it contributes to their tribe or whatever? Maybe they take pleasure in torturing farmers. I don't know. If anybody knows, let me know in the comment section, because it does paint the Sand People as just monsters, right? Just as animals. Yet in some of the comics, the Dark Horse comics from the Legends era, whatever, and even in Boba Fett, that crap TV show, we see that the Sand People, they have a culture, right? They're not just mindless brutes. Even though they kind of, they kind of remind me of Star Trek's The Klingons, right? Where they have a culture, but it's based on brutality, right? But I just don't understand the whole torturing of Shmi, right? So it's 100% understandable that Anakin would kill them all, right? I mean, geez, I'd probably do the same thing. I don't know about killing the young ones, but I'd definitely kill every adult after I find my mom like that, dark side or not. You know, that's just being human. And so, yeah, that was a great scene. And I love that this is one of the few moments in this film, but at least we got it, where we have a character-driven moment. We get to see how Anakin feels. We get to explore his feelings, right? There was nothing like this in Phantom Menace. And for the most part, there's nothing like this in the rest of the movie, right? So I appreciate this, right? Now, Revenge of the Sith does a better job at conveying how the characters are feeling than either first two prequels, but I appreciate this moment where we get to see how Anakin's feeling, because this type of stuff is important to telling a story, right? If it's all just plot-driven, things could get a little dry and boring, right? Now, Yoda and Mace, right? Yoda can sense Anakin basically being troubled, right? Something's going on with Anakin, and he could sense it, right? And that totally makes sense, right? Because Yoda is in tune with the Force, right? But I have a problem with this scene, and again, I'm just totally beaten down on the cinematography and the aesthetic of this film, and I just can't stand the lighting of this scene. It's like Yoda, he's just sitting there, and Mace Windu walks in, and it just feels really CGI-ish, and it just rubs me the wrong way. Now, I do want to say something positive about this movie. One positive thing that I really appreciate about this film is how this film gives us the most planets out of any of the Star Wars film. We go to 5 planets, right? Very ambitious. As I stated in the introduction to this review, this film has a lot to offer. There's a lot. It's massive, right? And I really appreciate that we get to go to 5 planets, right? And I like how George Lucas was able to offer such a big course meal with this film. And he reduced the unnecessary exposition to a certain degree, right? That's not to say that I prefer we focus on more things other than the romance and things like that. But I appreciate that he reduced the unnecessary exposition, the kind of stuff that was in the Phantom Menace, introducing all the pod racers, which didn't need to be done, and taking time to show the taxi arrive on Coruscant, which totally slowed the film down, right? So I feel like we get more meat in this film. Now, there's a famous quote by George Lucas. Well, actually, it's not famous. I'm going to make it famous, or I'm going to attempt to make it famous, because it should be well known as far as understanding how he approached these prequels, right? And he basically says that he used a lot of hamburger helper to make these movies, the first 2, right? Because most of the story that he had in mind was Revenge of the Sith, right? When Anakin became Vader. So he used a lot of quote-unquote hamburger helper to make episode 1 and 2. And I only bring it up because I feel like there's less hamburger helper in episode 2 than there was in episode 1. Episode 1 was way too long as far as unnecessary stuff. You could chop off 20 minutes of that movie and you would lose nothing. I couldn't say the same for this movie, right? Rather, for Attack of the Clones, I'd rather just have scenes swapped. Let's swap some of these deleted scenes for the scenes that are in the movie, and it would have made it a better film. But my whole point is that I like how George Lucas got rid of all the unnecessary exposition, right? He used the environments in this film to tell the story, rather than just, let's focus on some aliens over here doing some random stuff. Isn't this cool? Look at this world. Nah, man, let's just tell the story and have the environment be kind of like a background character and contribute to the foreground story, the main story, right? Now, I love the sequence when Anakin returns to the Lars homestead with his mother's body. The way Hayden Christensen carries his mother's body, there's a certain stiffness in his movements, like Darth Vader. It's a great nuance, right? And it's a great image, and it's excellent, right? I know things have lessened as far as the criticism towards Hayden Christensen, especially with his appearance in some of these Disney projects, but he did an outstanding job as far as his mannerisms and his movements. And this scene in particular is just a perfect example. When he arrives and he's carrying his mother's body and he's stiff, and you just see the look in his face, this coldness, like, don't talk to me right now, right? It's like, I totally believe that this kid is going to be Darth Vader, right? The only issue is when he talks, right? Some of the dialogue could be a little better, but yeah, I don't fault Hayden Christensen for that. And I said similar things in my Revenge of the Sith review, that some scenes, as far as dialogue, they're kind of hit or miss, right? It's like, maybe there should have been another take there. But as far as Hayden Christensen, when he's not talking, when he's emoting, when he's just making facial expressions and just the look in his eyes and his movements, oh man, he hits the head of the nail, right? It's amazing, the performance that he gives, right? Again, excellent imagery, right? Now, I kind of have an issue with this sequence that follows, where Anakin basically expresses to Padme what happened, right? So here we get to see the seeds that Palpatine planted begin to flourish, with him blaming Obi-Wan Kenobi, saying, I'm going to be the most powerful Jedi. I'll learn to stop people from dying and all this stuff. So all that stuff was planted in his mind, the inflating of his ego by Palpatine, right? Envy, all those things. Now, that's not the issue that I have with this scene. I kind of have an issue with Anakin telling Padme that he killed children, right? I think it's overkill, right? I totally, like, I just don't find it, I do not find it believable that Anakin telling Padme that he killed children, and I just don't find it believable that he would tell her this, and then later on in the film, she's going to turn around and be like, I love you. I've loved you ever since you came into my life. And I'm just like, dude, I just do not find it believable. I mean, you could say that she's empathizing with Anakin. And she says something along the lines of, like, you're only human. To be angry is, I understand. And you have to remember that the way the Sand People are depicted in this film, it's almost like they're mindless brutes, like monsters, right? Like orcs from Lord of the Rings, kind of, almost, right? I mean, I wanna restrain in using that example, but when I think of Shmi and how she's been tortured, for what reason, man? I mean, to me, that's just evil, right? The Sand People are evil. There was absolutely no reason to torture Shmi, right? Absolutely no reason at all. I mean, what the heck? She's not a warrior. She's not any kind of threat. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea, right? So to me, the Sand People are evil, right? So Anakin going in there killing them, fine, right? Killing the young ones, fine. But to tell Padme, I just don't know, man. I'm conflicted. I'm just conflicted as to whether him telling her is going to rob that scene later where she says she loves him of merit. If that could be valid, right? Her feeling that way. I mean, again, he talks about how the Sand People are they're animals. They're like animals, right? So I slaughter them like animals. And I'm like, okay, that's all fine and well, but when you use the word children, it really creates a sense, it generates almost like a humanity to them, right? If he had said they're cubs or something, or it maybe I would have not had a problem with the scene, but when you use the word children, it troubles me, right? He's like, I kill children, the men, the women, and the children too. And then Padme's like, okay, all right, you're only human. And then later she's like, I love you. I don't know, man. Because Padme, she's depicted as a very compassionate person, right? And I understand that the Sand People are they're monsters, right? They're animals, right? I get it. But when you use the word children, I think it totally throws the objective of the scene off for me. And that's honestly my problem. So me saying this, I can view my analysis and honestly say I think I have a greater problem with Anakin using the word children than the scene itself. I get it, right? Because you got to think about later in Revenge of the Sith when Obi-Wan Kenobi says to her, Anakin killed younglings. And then what does Padme say? No, I don't believe it, right? And it's just like, well, you know that he's fully capable of it because he specifically said that he killed children in this scene. So I kind of feel like maybe it derails that scene for me, right? So just something to think about, right? I think this sequence could have been executed better. And I much would rather have preferred that Anakin not tell Padme what happened. Keep it to himself. Have it contribute to the inner turmoil that he's feeling, right? However, when Anakin says that he slaughtered the Sand People, and that he hates them, the way he makes his lip quiver like that, that's pretty good performance, man. I don't think I could do that, right? You could tell that Hayden Christensen was investing a significant amount of heart and emotion to that performance. And I appreciate it. I gotta give him credit, because I remember not until recently, especially when these films came out, people hated Hayden Christensen. I remember visiting the internet forums, and it's like they hated him. They loathed him so much, right? And I think that it was unfair. It was unfair, the treatment that he got. And even though I can't stand these new Disney projects, at the very least, I'm glad that he's finally getting some respect, right? Because he did not deserve the level of hate that he got, right? Now, Jar Jar Binks basically being the one to introduce the motion in the Senate to create the clones, I don't think the execution was good here. Or rather, I don't think the setup was good. I think it was a little preposterous, right? For basically Palpatine to be talking to another political figure and kind of being like, if only Padme was here. And then and then totally like inferring like, come on, Jar Jar, wink wink, introduce the motion in the Senate on her behalf. If only Senator Amidala was here, wink wink. I mean, it's just like, really? Come on, man. I think it would have been better to just have Palpatine do some kind of forced suggestion thing and just have him like put the idea in his mind. Like, why not? Show Palpatine finesse his Sith powers or something. It just came across as unbelievable, right? That Jar Jar would be able to put two and two together, like, maybe he's talking about me. Maybe I should be the one to introduce the motion in the Senate to use the clone army. That could have been executed a lot better. It came across like a cartoon. And I know Star Wars is inspired by Saturday morning serials, old serials like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and things like that. But I don't know, man. Again, this could have been done a lot better, right? And I just want to say, like, just mentioning that, Attack of the Clones is the one film in the entire 6-film Star Wars saga by George Lucas that feels the most like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, or like John Carter of Mars. It really does. It really does, right? Now, in regards to Padme and Anakin's arrival on Geonosis, I have an issue with this sequence because Padme explicitly says that she wants to pursue a diplomatic solution. She wants to be diplomatic, right? She doesn't want to be an aggressor. She doesn't want a confrontation. She says, literally, that she wants to pursue a diplomatic solution to the situation. Okay, but what do they do instead? Instead of going through the proper channels, instead of going through the front door, they sneak in through the droid factory or through some vents, whatever. Now, to me, that's very contradictory to wanting to pursue a diplomatic solution to the situation. Because if you're going to sneak in, that's considered like being a spy, right? That's not diplomatic. So to me, I got a problem with that. I got a problem with the way this sequence is set up because it's contradictory to what Padme says, right? And it's not a surprise that this sequence, this droid factory sequence, it wasn't even in the original script. It wasn't part of the original plan. Instead, it was created after the fact in post-production because George Lucas decided that he wanted another action sequence. And it kind of feels that way. A lot of people don't like this sequence because it feels very cartoonish. There's like this Looney Tunes Acme Factory kind of aesthetic going on here. And I can totally empathize with that opinion. However, there's still something about this sequence that delivers on the action. There's good action. It's kind of suspenseful, even though it could get silly with C-3PO coming apart and his parts being replaced with a battle droid and him being confused. Yeah, it's silly, but it's nowhere near as bad as, say, Jar Jar Binks, right? So anything after Jar Jar Binks doesn't feel as bad because Jar Jar's antics were just totally, totally off the chain. They were too much. My only problem mainly with this scene is how it was set up, with Padme contradicting herself, saying that she wants a diplomatic solution but sneaks in like a spy, and just the aesthetic, right? It feels too Looney Tunes Acme Factory. That's the vibe I get visually from watching this. Now, once Anakin and Padme are captured, there was a nice little sequence that got deleted where Padme confronts Dooku. I said that previously. I wish it was still in there because, again, I just like seeing the exchange between characters, right? I want to see acting. I want to see story. But after that, we get Padme basically professing her love to Anakin out of nowhere, right? It comes completely out of nowhere. And to be fair, it's not the only romance that comes out of nowhere in film history. This kind of stuff happens all the time with these major blockbuster films. I don't care who you are or what you say, right? For people to be like, "Oh my God, that came out of nowhere and is so unbelievable." For me, what makes it unbelievable is not that it came out of nowhere. What makes it unbelievable for me, just a little bit, is like I said, when Anakin talks about killing children to Padme, and then now she's in love with him. I'm just kind of like, I don't know, man. I don't know about that. But other than that, just her coming out of nowhere with this, it's not a big deal because at least they have some kind of history together. They were childhood friends, right? 10 years ago, they were childhood friends, and they at least have some kind of history. Now, I'm going to compare this to the ridiculous romance in the film The Matrix, which I think is a masterpiece. Aside from this whole notion of Trinity falling in love with Neo in a matter of like 2 days, right? If you go back and you look at that film, the way that she's like, "Oh, I'm supposed to be in love with the chosen one," and okay, but then it's like they've only known each other for a short period of time. It feels like a couple of days, right? Oh, a week maximum, right? And then out of nowhere, she's like, "Oh, Neo, you can't die because I'm in love with the chosen one." To me, every time I see that film, I'm just like, what a bunch of BS, right? So I look at that film and then I look at this film and I'm like, for people to come out and say that this romance between Anakin and Padme and her professing her love for him, it's unbelievable. When you can compare it to those kind of films like The Matrix, and that's just one example where characters fall in love super fast in a matter of days. So I'm not going to give this scene where Padme professes her love to Anakin a hard time, other than the fact that, I don't know about her being in love with Anakin after he said he killed children, right? Maybe if he had not used that word, I'd feel better about it, but I just wanted to provide that little analysis, right? Now, when she does say that I've been dying ever since you come back into my life, if you read the novelization of this book, you get more of the internal dialogue and the thoughts that Padme has, like when she's first introduced to Anakin and how that makes her feel and things like that. So it's more believable in the book, right? Because when you just rely on the film, we don't know what's going on in Padme's head because we never get any alone time with her. In the deleted scenes, we do get this sequence where Padme has some moments with her family, her sister, her mother, and they talk about her feelings for Anakin. whether like he could be a potential mate. And then she's like, on the surface, she's like, no way, right? But then you could see like the nuances in her reaction and in her eyes that she is considering, that she's attracted to Anakin, right? So again, another example of a deleted scene that could have been in the film to better service this romance, this story, right? Now, when it comes to the arena action sequences, I really like the monsters for this sequence. They look like something that was inspired by the work of Ray Harryhausen, who is one of the special effects masters from the old school Hollywood era. I mean, this guy did Clash of the Titans. This guy did Jason and the Argonauts. This guy did Sinbad in the Seventh Voyage and all the other Sinbad films. This guy literally is a master of special effects from that old school Hollywood era. And if you're familiar with his work and how his monsters typically have this very unique aesthetic it's basically the signature style of Ray Harryhausen. You really can feel the inspiration for these aliens, when these monsters that are attacking Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme in this arena sequence. And I really appreciate that, right? And again, this film, it's a fusion. We got film noir. We got the 1950 science fiction movies. We got a little bit of The Searchers. So when Anakin was looking for his mother on Tatooine, some of the inspiration for those sequences, or the aesthetic, or the overall tone of his search for his mom, that specific sequence, is derived from the John Wayne film, the John Wayne collaborative film, The Searchers, right? So you got some inspiration from that, and now you got some inspiration from Ray Harryhausen movies, and of course the Buck Rogers, John Carter of Mars kind of vibe. So this film, it really is an eclectic mix of different genres. And I appreciate that from George Lucas, right? That's what he does. That's what he's good at, right? Paying tribute to cinema and coming up with something unique, even though it's a fusion of different genres, right? Now, I really am not a big fan of the fight choreography for some of these Jedi that show up. I may be nitpicking, but I've seen the film a lot of times, and there's just something that kind of gets under my skin when I see some of these Jedi and their choreography in the background. It just looks poorly rehearsed, right? It almost looks like none of these actors are real martial arts or swordsmen, right? It just looks like it looks like they just went up to any person at Lucasfilm, like, hey, want to be in a Star Wars movie? Want to be a Jedi in the background? Oh, here, take this lightsaber, and I don't know, just swing it around. Oh, that's good enough. That's kind of how it feels. Again, it may be a nitpick because, of course, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the main characters in the foreground, they're doing their thing, right? But everything's so crystal clear now with 4K that I just look at the background and I'm just like, man, those Jedi, those moves look kind of stiff. You know what I mean? Almost like it was like they didn't rehearse anything, right? Now, talking about Mace Windu, Mace versus Jango Fett was awesome. That's what I always wanted to see from Boba Fett, right? So when Boba Fett was on the sailing barge in Return of the Jedi, a movie that I love, a movie that I adore, as far as that aspect, it was disappointing because this is what I expected. I expected something like Mace versus Jango Fett. And this totally redeems Boba for me. We get to see Jango use his flamethrower, his jetpack. We get to see him use his gun. We get to see him kill Jedi. I mean, it was awesome, right? He put up a way better fight than Boba, right? And then ultimately the way Mace Windu takes him out by chopping off his head, that was awesome. And if you really step back And think about it. Attack of the Clones has the most decapitations and amputations than any other Star Wars film, right? People are getting messed up in this, right? And again, I thought this fight was amazing. And I totally love the foreshadowing of Boba Fett's fate for following in his dad's footsteps when he picks up his helmet, right? Thought that was awesome. Now, I have made a more recent observation, and I don't know how I feel about what I'm about to say. And it's basically that we have basically the template for the clone DNA, which is Jango Fett, standing right next to Count Dooku, the leader of the Separatists, the guy that started the Clone Wars, right? By kidnapping or basically taking Obi-Wan Kenobi as hostage, right? And it's just kind of, it's really challenging and confusing, to say the least, to think that the Jedi couldn't put two and two together. That, oh, wait a minute, the guy that's the leader of the Separatists is chilling with the main clone DNA provider, whatever, the template for the clones. That's like, they're together. The fact that they couldn't conclude that these guys are involved in something big, like they are part of this conspiracy, right? For me, it's just like, again, maybe it's not something that big of a deal if it were addressed, is what I'm trying to say. So if you were to have like just a conversation where the Jedi talk about why was Count Dooku with the template for the clones, there's something going on here, right? And you had a discussion, and then the Jedi say, well, there's nothing that we could do because the Separatists have their army and they're going to invade the Republic, right? So there definitely is something conspiratorial going on. However, we have no choice but to use the clones in the meantime because we have no army. We need to use the clones. We will investigate what the connection is between these two because it's definitely a point of interest. Boom. That's all you had to say. And then it would not make the Jedi look like idiots, is what I'm trying to say. But I digress. I know these films, they're rated PG. I know the original trilogy wasn't some super deep political thriller with layers of plot and dialogue. But you have to step back and see that, look, you are trying to basically tell the backstory to the original trilogy. That means world building. That means character development. And I know the execution has to be in a way where things are accessible to an audience where the main target demographic is 12-year-olds, right? However, it's like, if we're going to do this backstory and this world building to the original trilogy, this means that it's going to involve a significant amount of world building. And I just sometimes think that maybe George Lucas bit off more than he can chew. And maybe he isn't sophisticated enough as a writer to tell this story. Because if you read the novelizations to the prequels, they do a better job conveying the story. I mean, I'm not going to completely dump on Lucas because, again, it's his story. He provides the treatment, he provides the screenplay to the novelists, to the authors, and they're the ones that are like, okay, this is your story, I'm going to elaborate more on a few things. So I think at the very least, George Lucas could have collaborated with better writers to just make the story a little bit more logistical, make the story a little bit more impeccable as far as logistics, and give it a little bit more credence. Because for the older audiences, sometimes we're just left scratching our heads like, how can this be? And, and like, what? Things just need to be fleshed out more. Things need to be elaborated on more. And this is one prime example how the Jedi don't ask questions about these weird conspiratorial things that are going on right in front of their face. But I digress, okay? So once the Clone Wars begin, we get this epic battle, right? And this thing blew my mind back in the day. For all the people that dismiss this like it's just CGI trash, I don't know where you were, but when this film came out in 2002, it blew my mind. I was like, I've never seen battles this epic and on this kind of scale, yet alone for a Star Wars movie, right? I mean, sure, now we could look back and be like, oh, it's a CGI fest. There's no real actors going on there. It takes me out of the movie, but I don't feel that way because I remember that feeling. Every time I see this battle, I get that feeling, that epicness. And sure, it would have been nice to have real clone troopers in there rather than CGI clones. But honestly, back when this film came out, I couldn't tell the difference, right? I mean, I really didn't care, right? And a lot of it has to do with the directing of this sequence, of these sequences. It's a documentary kind of style because you have these quick zooms and shaky cam, and it really benefits this action sequence. I mean, you feel like you're right there. And I love that George Lucas implemented this documentary style, because if you ever check out my analysis for the original trilogy, especially for the first Star Wars, the original Star Wars, George Lucas was going for this aesthetic that he called fantasy documentary. It was like the combination of a fantasy film with a documentary style approach, right? And for the most part, we never got that again for Return of the Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back, right? So to have just a little inkling of a documentary kind of vibe in a Star Wars film again, it made me excited, right? And a prime example of like a documentary kind of a feeling for the original Star Wars film, A New Hope, is the way, for instance, for me, the way that scene in the cantina when Obi-Wan Kenobi chopped off that dude's arm that was bullying Luke. Go back and look at that. Go back and see how that sequence was not stylish at all. It wasn't going for like action style. It feels like you're there. It's just one quick, clean chop of that dude's arm, almost like a samurai, right? And it's just boom, boom. And I love the way that scene was shot. It had a documentary kind of feel. And there's a lot of sequences in A New Hope that feel that way. And my point is, I appreciate George Lucas taking a documentary style approach to the action sequences in at the end of this film, The Clone Wars, right? It was great, And it's just important to remember that we can look back and scoff at how it's all CGI now, but you got to remember technology is always developing, right? And just because the technology looks a little dated doesn't mean that the film is bad, right? Because if you feel that way, then that means you cannot enjoy so many good films. Like, think of the original classic cinematic masterpiece that was the original King Kong. Are you really going to look at the old King Kong from the 1930s and be like, oh my God, what were they thinking? The special effects look terrible. What an awful movie. I mean, you're going to look like an idiot in the presence of other film connoisseurs and film lovers, right? It's like, what? Same thing with other things like Ray Harryhausen movies. Are you really going to look at a Ray Harryhausen movie? Say you look at Jason and the Argonauts, the sequences where he's fighting the skeletons. Are you going to look at that and be like, oh my God, that looks so terrible. What were they thinking? This film is trash. Like, no, man. It's a product of its time. The most important thing for these movies is the innovation that they provided and how they revolutionized the industry with the technology that they paved the way with, and most importantly, the story. The story. The story is what makes those films with these special effects that are dated. That's what makes these films last forever, right? And here we are. How many years later since Attack of the Clones has come out? Almost 20 years, and we're still talking about Attack of the Clones, right? For better or for worse, it's all your point of view, right? Now, in regards to the lightsaber duel, I really enjoy the taunting that Count Dooku does. I particularly love the sequence where Anakin and Count Dooku are in the dark when the lights go out, and it focuses on their eyes, right? And the lightsabers are the only thing illuminating their eyes. And I thought that was great, right? Because it's very unique artistically. And George Lucas, he does a lot of unique stuff in Attack of the Clones, right? I feel like he kind of played it safe in Phantom Menace and a little bit in Revenge of the Sith as far as like trying things like that. But in this film, he does a lot of unique stuff, man. He does the shaky cam, the zooms, the documentary vibe with the Clone War battle, and then the way that he framed the bounty hunter, making you think that he's going after Anakin, but in fact, the bounty hunter's going after Obi-Wan. I love the way that sequence was cut, right? That was very creative, very unique for George Lucas, right? And now we got this whole focusing on the eyes and using the lightsabers to illuminate the anxiety, the fear, the tension. Count Dooku looks focused. Anakin looks focused. But then he kind of looking like he's wavering. He's concentrating. He's trying. I mean, it was very intense, right? And it's very unique in the sense that it's a lightsaber battle, right? You want to see the lightsabers clashing and all that stuff. But this was a totally different approach. And it worked for me, right? Because I was able to focus on the feelings of the people that are fighting, of Anakin and Dooku, right? I was able to actually feel their emotions during this fight rather than kind of like just sitting back and watching the choreography, right? I thought that was great. You don't see that much in Star Wars. So that unique approach was very much appreciated by me. Now, the Yoda fight, I honestly have to say, and this is to all the people that I think like half the people that I encounter either love it or hate it, right? But for the people that hate it, Yoda is not supposed to fight. It totally ruins the character, blah, blah, blah. Look, this Yoda fight was one of the greatest moments of my movie-going experience in my entire life. I've never been in a theater and had so many people jump out of their seat cheering, right? I mean, I remember vividly when Yoda stepped on screen, and then when he used the Force to bring the lightsaber to his hand, the whole theater lost their mind. Right? And I think I saw this film in the theater, I kid you not, like 5 times, and every single time everybody lost their mind. Right? It was amazing, right? And now that when I watch it, I still think it's a good scene. But this whole sentiment that Yoda should not use a lightsaber, he should just use the Force, it ruins the character. Did George Lucas even watch Empire Strikes Back, and yada 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 and all that stuff? And I'm just kind of like, look, the Yoda in Empire Strikes Back has learned from his mistakes, right? Obviously, the Jedi failed miserably when it came to the Clone Wars. I mean, their whole order was destroyed. Anakin became Vader. This was their failing, right? Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. So why can't Yoda learn, right? That's why when he says that the Force is not about aggression, war does not make one great, maybe that's how he was able to learn that, to come to that conclusion, to be the version that he is in Empire Strikes Back, because he lost his way too, you know? But I do understand where the sentiment comes from, because you also have to remember that the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy were made 15 years apart, right? And during that 15 years, a lot of material was coming out from George Lucas. And what I'm trying to say is this. At one point, and I think this is even in the book The Making of Return of the Jedi, George Lucas explicitly says that Yoda and the Emperor do not use lightsabers. They use the Force. They're like priests, right? They don't need swords, right? And he was kind of comparing the Jedi to like crusaders, right? They're the ones with the swords. They're the ones that go into battle. But Yoda and the Emperor are kind of above that, right? And something along those lines is said. I'm paraphrasing, but he definitely did say something like that. And I know he definitely said that Yoda doesn't use a lightsaber, right? So what happened? George Lucas changed his mind. That's it. He changed his mind. But for those 15 years, or maybe even a little bit more, everybody who read that material felt that Yoda should not use a lightsaber. Same with the Emperor. So I can understand the notion of being a little bit disappointed when this film came out and you saw Yoda use a lightsaber. However, I didn't have that sentiment. I was blown away. I thought it was awesome. I particularly love how before Yoda and Dooku clash with their sabers, they do this whole like Jedi Sith wizardry battle, right? It's almost like two wizards trying to outdo one another. Kind of reminding me of Saruman and Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. And they use basically their force powers. And I thought that was awesome how Yoda takes the dark side energy, the lightning, and he takes it into him, right? And he's like, much to learn you still have. Like, that was so badass. That was so badass. I mean, it just totally illustrated how the light side is stronger than the dark side. And it was so great, man. I mean, every time I see this fight between Dooku and Yoda, I'm taken back 20 years when I was a kid. And I'm in that theater again, and I'm reliving it. I'm hearing the crowd cheer, and I'm just like, it was one of the greatest moments in my film-going experience. And even though the film definitely has some shortcomings, there's definitely good things as well, right? And I will always have love for this film because of that. And seeing Anakin get his arm chopped off is total foreshadowing for not only him becoming Vader, but also for his son. His son losing his arm. So you see, like, the stories, they kind of rhyme, which is what George Lucas said, right? It's poetic. It's like another stanza, right? The son is a different stanza than the father, but they're rhyming. It's foreshadowing, like father, like son. I thought that was pretty cool. I honestly want to say that Count Dooku's ship, the Solar Sailor kind of thing, that was pretty cool. Thought that was awesome. And here, when Dooku meets with Sidious, finally, we get the reveal that he is Tyrannus. And from that, we can infer, using our powers of deduction, that he hired Jango Fett, right? And that he killed Sifo-Dyas and placed the order in his name. So, to me, again, and I said this in the beginning, I was never lost. As soon as Dooku said, I'm Tyrannus, or whatever, Sidious greets him as Tyrannus, I'm like, okay, I see what happened. He's involved. He killed Sifo-Dyas. He's the one that deleted the Jedi archives. He hired Jango. Mystery solved. So for the people out there that couldn't put two and two together, man, you guys have issues with deduction and inference, man. Like, seriously. And that's why that Clone Wars cartoon in the, what season was it? The 6th season. They had to have that episode where it was like literally spelled out. And Obi-Wan Kenobi goes, "You are Tyrannus? You were the one that ordered the clones," or something like that. And I just felt like, you know, I felt like it kind of makes the Jedi look dumb because now they know what's going on, right? See, here it was revealed to the audience, but it wasn't revealed to the Jedi, right? So now the Jedi know what's going on, and Yoda even says in that cartoon, he says, why did, or the other Jedi say to Yoda, "Why did our enemy create an army for us to fight?" And it's just like, okay, all right, well, at least they asked the questions, right? Were they thorough enough for me to make it more believable? Not really. And I think the Jedi needed to ask questions in this movie, not in some spin-off TV show or in some novel. They needed to ask those questions in the movie, in this movie, right? But I digress, right? Now, Anakin and Padme, they get married. But before that, we get the foreshadowing of the Empire coming, which I thought was totally awesome. They're playing the Imperial March. We're seeing the ships that are basically the precursors to the Star Destroyers getting loaded up with the clones, which are the precursors to the Stormtroopers. We got Palpatine there. And basically, this is it. The Empire's coming. We could see it over the hill. Right? We could see it on the horizon. The Empire's coming. That was awesome. Then the last shot is Anakin and Padme getting married. I mean, hey, we knew this was going to happen, right? I mean, we knew that these two had to get together in order for Leia and Luke to be born. Whatever, right? And, John Williams' score, what's it called? Across the Stars? Man, it's a beautiful song. It's beautiful. If I listen to it in isolation from the movie, it's a tearjerker. However, it's just so hard to hear that theme and then see Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman and not feel that it kind of makes it feel even more corny, right? I think they should have casted Padme with a different actress. I really feel that way. I think this film would have benefited from a different actress immensely. And I'm just going to keep saying that. I said that in the beginning. I said it like a dozen times already. I don't have a problem with Hayden. I think Natalie Portman is the weak link in this relationship, in this chemistry, right? It made no sense that they recasted Jake Lloyd with an older actor, but not recast Natalie Portman with an older actress. Recast Padme's character. I mean, I don't know. I still don't understand why they did that. It makes my brain hurt. Anyway, that's this film's greatest weakness. It's the chemistry between Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman. Doesn't matter if it's romance or not. Because even during their action sequences, like when they're fighting in the arena and they have that exchange where like, you call this a diplomatic solution kind of thing. It was like, man. I mean, it's just like, no. It feels really cheesy and corny. So that ends my review and analysis of Attack of the Clones, right? It's a film with a lot of stuff going on. It's a massive film. Massive. A lot of ideas, a lot of planets, a lot of plot points, a lot of world building, a lot of lore. It definitely has some shortcomings. However, there's some good, too, in this film. Now, is it better than Phantom Menace? I want to say Phantom Menace is better just because it had Liam Neeson as the main character. It had Liam Neeson as the main character, and because Liam Neeson was always there at the forefront of the story, I could follow his character, I could follow Qui-Gon. He made the stuff that I didn't like more tolerable because I always liked him, right? I always liked Qui-Gon. I love Liam Neeson. So I could just kind of tune out the stuff that I don't like and be like, okay, it's cool. I'm here with Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon got me on this, man. He's carrying me through this movie, right? But here it's a little bit more difficult to endure the stuff that I don't like, because when Ewan McGregor's on screen, everything's good. But when it's Padme and Anakin together, it's kind of like I get anxious. I just want to get to the points where things are good. And because of that, I want to say Phantom Menace is a little bit better, right? So at the end of the day, I want to give Attack of the Clones a C-. It has some good things. It has some bad things. But overall, it's entertaining. But I just wish the execution could have been better. I wish Natalie Portman had been recasted. They should have had an older Padme. I wish some of the deleted scenes, if they needed to keep Natalie Portman, they should have swapped some of these deleted scenes. Swap these deleted scenes for the scenes that are in there that just didn't need to be in there, right? The scenes that got left on the cutting room floor were great. If somebody were to make a fan edit of this movie, and I've made a fan edit, this movie would have easily been a B+. It would have been great, right? But again, there's good, there's bad, but at the end of the day, it's watchable. There's enjoyable parts, but there's also parts that definitely could have been better. So thank you guys for listening to this review, an in-depth analysis of Attack of the Clones. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share. May the Force be with you. And last but not least, one love, people. Take care.